Part 1. The Disgraced. The fires gave her away. They always had. She was 13 the first time it happened. The inner sanctum, her first year at the Grand Shrine, the other apprentices pressing their palms to cold stone and straining for something like warmth. Shizuka had walked through the door, and every sacred fire in the room surged 3 feet into the air without being touched. The head priest had gone pale. He had smiled at her, the kind of smile that had nothing behind it, and told her she showed great promise. She had not yet learned to recognize what lived behind a smile like that. 9 years later, she was still learning the cost of that first moment. It was the harvest ceremony that ended it. She had performed 100 purifications in her years of service. She had cleansed shrines that senior priests refused to enter, purified spirits that turned grown men gray, handled dark accumulations that the Yoshida hierarchy quietly routed to her while ensuring she received no credit for the results. She had made herself small. She had worn her bangs forward over the mark on her forehead, the white starburst birthmark that the head priest had called, in her 4th year of service, unsightly, because she had learned by then what happened when she took up too much space. She had believed for a long time that patience was a form of devotion. The harvest ceremony broke that. The final prayer left her mouth, and the sky answered. Every kami within 10 miles of the Yoshida shrine felt it and came, not in sequence, not in the measured arrivals of a properly conducted ceremony, but all at once, drawn like moths to a fire that had simply become too large to ignore. The air above the courtyard shimmered. The sacred fires in their iron stands blazed white. The assembled noble families, who had attended many ceremonies at many shrines, went very quiet in the way of people confronted with something that exceeded their categories. She felt it herself, the pure, overwhelming rightness of it. Her gift running completely unfettered for the first time in 9 years, the accumulated compression of a decade of making herself small, releasing all at once into something that felt for 30 seconds, like exactly what she had been born to do. She understood in the silence that followed that she had just made an irreversible mistake. They stripped her titles within the week. Spiritual irregularity, a phrase designed to sound like failure without specifying what she had failed at, because they could not say the truth. The truth was simpler and far more damning to them than to her. She was too powerful. The hearing was brief. The head priest read the charges in the careful, neutral tone of a man who had rehearsed his expression in advance. To his left, Tomo, Senior Miko, the woman who organized the hierarchy's social architecture the way other people breathed, without visible effort or apparent awareness that she was doing it, sat with her hands folded and her face arranged into something adjacent to regret. Shizuka stood in the center of the room and did not look at the floor. "You are being reassigned," the head priest said. "A rural shrine, for contemplation." There was no rural shrine. She knew this before he finished the sentence. The real message was in what was not said. There is a forest 2 hours north. There is an abandoned structure inside it. Go there and disappear and let this matter be concluded. She was given her removal robes, her walking staff, and the contents of her personal chest. The sum total of what 9 years of service had made hers. It fit in a bundle smaller than a child's. She stood at the Yoshida Shrine's outer gate and looked at the road north. She felt, underneath the grief and the fury and the specific nausea of an injustice she had seen coming and could not stop, something else, something older and quieter. She had always known the fires were real. Whatever they were taking from her, they could not take that. She turned north. She walked. The forest had no good name. The villagers of Ashimori called it Kitsunebi no Mori, the forest of foxfire, because of the lights. Small flames the color of old gold that drifted between the trees at night without burning anything. The kind of lights that made people leave offerings at the tree line and walk back quickly and not speak too directly about what they had seen. She entered it as the light failed on her 3rd day of walking. The abandoned shrine sat further in than the path suggested. The path itself half swallowed by decades of undergrowth, marked more by what it pressed down than where it led. She followed it by feel and by something older than instinct. The same sense that had always known where the kami lived in a space before she was told. She found the shrine in the last of the dusk. Small, very old, older, she suspected, than any priest currently living had documentation for. The main hall still stood, its cypress beams weathered silver, the thatched roof intact on one side and half collapsed on the other. The stone torii gate had moss climbing its legs and a crack through the lintel, but it had not fallen. She stood before it in the dark with her bundle and her staff, and the cold of the forest pressing in from all sides. She could disappear. That was what they intended. Sit in this ruin until her supplies ran out and return to the Yoshida hierarchy as something they could manage. Diminished, dependent, grateful for whatever scraps of reinstatement they chose to offer. Or, she set her bundle down. She found the old broom tucked under the eave of the outer building, handle rotted at the base but still usable, and she began to sweep the stone path, in the dark, in the cold, for no audience and no acknowledgement, because the path was worth sweeping. She had been there 7 nights when he came. She was performing the hooray, the ritual purification, the haragushi moving through its prescribed arcs, when the air inside the hall changed. The brazier fire did not gutter. It simply bent sideways, as though something large had passed between it and the wind. No wind moved inside a closed hall. She finished the prayer, lowered the haragushi. "You're in my forest," said a voice from the darkness behind the altar. Not rough. More like a sword kept sheathed for a long time. The weight and the edge both present, neither recently used. "This is a Shinto shrine," she said without turning. "It belongs to the kami." The kami who was enshrined here left 300 years ago. The priests who served it left 50 years after that. A pause. "You are the first human to rebuild the offering fire in longer than you have been alive." "Then it was time," she said. Shizuka turned. He stood at the edge of the brazier's light, tall, robes the deep amber gray of autumn forest floor. His hair was dark and loose and very still. His eyes were gold, not amber, not brown gold. Gold the way old coins were gold, the way the last light before sunset was gold. A color that did not belong in a human face and knew it and did not apologize for this. Behind him, at the edge of the darkness, tails. Not 1, not 3. 7. A 7-tailed kitsune was not young. A 7-tailed kitsune had watched shrines rise and fall and rise again. Had been alive, perhaps, when the gods still walked openly between worlds. She raised the haragushi. "You have entered a consecrated space," she said. "I ask you to leave." His expression did not change. It was not cruelty in his face. It was something she had no word for yet, the look of something so old it had lost the capacity to be surprised, watching the world perform its small repetitions and feeling nothing in particular about any of them. "You cannot purify what was here before your shrine existed," he said. "And you cannot drive me from a forest I have walked for longer than your bloodline has remembered how to pray." She let the power rise the way it always had, easily, naturally, the sacred fires surging in the brazier, the air around the haragushi crackling with something old and clean and absolutely certain of itself. Nothing happened. He did not flinch. He did not retreat. He watched her with those gold eyes, and the only change was something minute at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The ghost of recognition. Something seen that had not been expected. "Interesting," he said. She lowered the haragushi slowly. In 9 years of service, she had never failed a purification. Not once. She had cleansed spirits that reduced senior priests to trembling. She had not moved this one a single inch. "What are you?" she said, though she already knew. "My name is Kagan," he said. "I have lived in this forest for hundreds of years." Those gold eyes moved over her, unhurried. "And you are not what I expected a disgraced priestess to be." The word landed. Disgraced. Shizuka heard every ripple of it. "Get out of my shrine," she said. He did not move, but the quality of his stillness shifted, the way air shifted before rain. "You cannot purify me," he said. "I have tried for some years to understand what might. It has not been found." A pause, and something moved behind the gold of his eyes that she could not name. "Your fire is stronger than any Miko I have encountered in 3 centuries, and I have encountered many." "Then you should have left before it found you." "Perhaps," he said. He turned, and the darkness simply took him back. The tails dissolved into shadow. The gold left the air. The brazier settled to its ordinary height. Shizuka stood alone in the hall she had reclaimed and looked at her hands, steady, always steady, and understood 2 things at once. Her purification had not failed. It had reached him. She had felt it, felt the edge of contact, felt her power press against something vast and deep and genuinely immovable. Not corruption, not darkness. Something else entirely. A power that simply was, the way mountains were, the way the oldest rivers were, carved so deep into the world that the concept of being removed from it had become meaningless. She sat down in front of the brazier. She would need to think about this. Outside, in the dark of Kitsunebi no Mori, something that had not felt curiosity in a very long time turned it over carefully. like a coal that had unexpectedly retained its heat. Part 2. Uneasy ground. She had been told once that she had a face that made men uncomfortable, not because of ugliness. She had understood early that she was not ugly. Her features were what the older women at the Grand Shrine called too precise, as though the gods had been paying too much attention when they made her. And then there was the birthmark. It sat at the center of her forehead, a starburst shape, the skin slightly raised and the color of winter moonlight, unmistakable against her complexion. When she was a child, she had pressed her small fingers to it in front of polished bronze mirrors and felt something hum beneath the surface. Faint, warm, like a coal banked deep. The head priest had called it unsightly in her 4th year of service. Quietly, with a tone of mild regret, as if it pained him to notice. Amiko represents the purity of the kami's servants. It is distracting during ceremonies. She had wanted to say, "The kami gave it to me, and you are asking me to hide a gift from the gods you claim to serve." She had said nothing. She had learned the cost of speaking directly. He had suggested the bangs himself, a style that noble women wore, loose hair framing the forehead, covering what he called the irregularity, not a proper Miko hairstyle. By asking her to wear it, he had been asking her to look subtly and permanently, slightly less like what she was. She had understood this. She had worn them anyway, because the alternative was his eyes moving to her forehead during every ceremony, that small frown between his brows, that quiet performance of disappointment he had perfected over decades of managing the people around him. She had made herself easy to look at. She had learned that this was different from being seen. The shrine was warmer in the 2nd week. She had cleared the debris from the main hall, repaired the offering table with bartered wood, and rehung the paper lanterns along the inner corridor. The forest pressed close on all sides, but she had begun to understand its quality of attention. Not malevolent, simply aware, the way very old places were aware, accumulating observation the way old wood accumulated rings. She had not seen Kagan since the 7th night, but she felt him the way you felt weather, a pressure at the edges of perception, a quality of the air that changed depending on where in the shrine grounds she stood. Near the old camphor tree at the back of the grounds, it was stronger, denser, like the forest breathing differently there. On the 10th day, she left an offering at the base of that tree. Rice, salt, sake she could barely afford. Not for him, for the kami of the forest, whoever remained of them. She was aware that he would see it. She was aware that she meant him to. She filed this under things to examine later and went back to work. Shizuka was resetting the stone path on the 14th day when she became aware of him at the tree line. Not approaching, simply present. Watching with those gold eyes, catching the afternoon light in a way human eyes did not. She did not look up immediately. She moved a stone into place, pressed it level, checked it with her palm. "You've been watching," she said. "You've been rebuilding. A neutral observation, no judgment in it. Someone has to." He was quiet. She picked up the next stone. "The kami of this shrine left when the priests left," he said. "Rebuilding the structure does not bring it back." "I know," she set the stone. "I'm not rebuilding it for what was here before. I'm rebuilding it for what could come." Another silence. She had noticed that he used silence differently than humans did, not to gather thoughts or manage discomfort, but simply as a medium. He existed in it without effort. "The village," he said. "You intend to bring them back. They leave offerings at the tree line because no one taught them the forest was safe." She looked up at him directly, the way she had learned not to look at the Yoshida priests, because they had punished directness, and he, whatever else he was, had not. "Is the forest safe?" Those gold eyes held hers. "For those who come with clean intentions," he said. "It has always been." "Then they should know that." He looked at her for a long moment, the vast, unhurried attention of something turning its full focus to a very specific point. "You were sent here to disappear," he said. "Yes. And instead you are making noise." "I am making a shrine," she said. When she glanced up a moment later, he was gone. But the camphor tree at the back of the grounds had a single white fox lily blooming at its base. Fox lilies did not bloom in this season. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she went back to work. He thought about her for 3 days. Not the fact of her, the quality of her. She had looked at him, categorized what he was with a precision that had surprised him, failed to purify him without apparent distress, told him to leave as if he were an inconvenient guest, rather than something that had driven grown men from their minds by proximity alone, and gone back to laying stones. Kagan sat deep in the forest in the hollow of an ancient cedar that had been old when the shrine was young, and turned this over with the patience of something that had long since stopped being surprised by the world and had just encountered an exception. The birthmark pulsed when she prayed. He had seen it clearly each time from the tree line, the white starburst luminous in a way that had nothing to do with brazier light. She still covered it with those borrowed bangs. That small gesture of pushing her hair back while her hands were full, then catching herself, correcting, covering again. It had the quality of something learned under conditions where forgetting was costly. He had seen a mark like that before, not often, not in recent centuries. The last time had been the early Heian period. A woman standing in a river with her arms raised, calling down rain with a voice that cracked the sky open. She had not known what she was either, until she did. He wanted to know who had put that habit of hiding in Shizuka's hands. He left on a moonless night, stepping out of the forest onto the road south. The grand shrine of the Yoshida materialized out of the dark like a statement of institutional confidence. Fresh lacquer gleaming in the moonlight, stone paths swept clean, sacred fires burning high in their iron stands. Everything calculated to impress, maintained with the care of an institution that understood the relationship between appearance and authority. He placed one hand on the outer gate. The sacred boundary recognized him the way a candle recognized a furnace. Not with resistance, but with the immediate understanding that whatever it had been built to stop, this was not in that category. He walked through. The dogs in the outer yard did not bark. The night watch felt a brief, sourceless unease he would later attribute to the cold. Kagan moved through the Yoshida shrine like a current through still water. Present, purposeful, leaving no trace on the surface. He found what he was looking for in the women's wing. 3 senior Miko in the common room, screens drawn, speaking in the easy tone of women at the end of a long day. He settled into the garden's shadow and listened. He took their measure quickly. The oldest, quiet, with the face of someone who had seen too much institutional politics to be surprised by any of it, and had made a private peace with what that said about her choices. She refilled her cup and listened more than she spoke. The youngest, careful with her words in the way of someone who had learned which rooms were safe for opinions and which were not. The one in the center was Tomo, perhaps 40, handsome, sitting with the assurance of someone whose position had long since stopped requiring maintenance. She wore her authority the way some people wore formal robes, not as something put on, but as something that had simply become how she occupied space. It took him very little time to understand that she had been the architect of it, not the head priest. He had provided the institutional authority, signed the documents, lent his name to the process. But Tomo had been the hand. She had built the case, shaped the narrative, delivered it in a form the priest could act upon without feeling responsible for what he was doing. The shrine is better without her, Tomo was saying, returning to a subject she had clearly resolved and enjoyed revisiting. The ceremonies are calm now, ordered. Every time she performed a rite, the energy was excessive, unstable. Impressive, though, the younger Miko said, her tone balanced between agreement and qualification. Tomo's expression shifted. Barely. Impressive is not appropriate. A fire that burns too large destroys as much as it illuminates. She had no control. What you mean, Kagan thought from the shadow, is that you could not manage her. What you mean is she exceeded you, and you chose to call it a flaw. She was devoted, said the younger Miko, still carefully. She was arrogant, Tomo said, selecting the word with visible satisfaction. She believed her gifts set her above the requirements that govern the rest of us. Above humility. A pause. The birthmark. She believed it meant something, that she was specially favored. Didn't it? Said the younger Miko. Quiet, barely above a murmur, but said, and the room acknowledged it with a specific silence. Didn't it mean something? She said again. And this time something had come through the carefulness. Something that had been waiting for a long time and decided it was tired of waiting. She was the strongest practitioner this shrine has ever had. Every kami that visited during her years here, I felt them. I felt the difference. And since she left, I have felt. That is enough, Tomo said. The younger Miko closed her mouth. The careful neutrality came back like a mask resettled. The oldest Miko excused herself quietly, citing the hour. The younger one followed shortly after. Tomo sat alone with her sake and the comfortable architecture of her certainties. Kagan stood in the garden long after the lamps went out. He felt the weight of what he had heard settle into him, the way sediment settled to the bottom of deep water. Slowly, completely. finding its permanent place. She had been powerful beyond their ability to manage, so they called it arrogance. She had been marked beyond their ability to explain, so they called it vanity. She had been present in a way that made the kami attend, that made even a junior Miko feel the difference between a shrine with her in it and a shrine without. And they had called it instability, filed the paperwork, sent her to disappear. He looked at the sacred fires burning in their iron stands, the same fires that had surged 3 feet when she was 13 years old, and he thought about Lord Imagawa's commission, the seasonal purification ceremony, the most significant gathering the shrine had held in 5 years. He thought about timing, because his presence in the forest 2 hours north, centuries of accumulated spiritual power bleeding into the regional fabric, had been enriching the sacred ground of everything within his range, quietly and continuously, since before anyone at the Yoshida Shrine was born. They had been mistaking his overflow for their own earned power. It was not. The foxfire in his palm burned small and steady. He could think of nothing more appropriate than letting them discover this for themselves. He turned and walked back through the outer gate, and the boundary sealed behind him as if he had never been there. He had seen what he needed to see. Now he would wait. Part 3. What the Gods Remember. The morning of the ceremony arrived cold and perfectly clear. Lord Imagawa's retinue came through the gate in formal procession, a sea of careful color, years of political relationship made visible in a single courtyard. Lord Imagawa himself was a man of perhaps 55, compact and deliberate, with the face of someone who had navigated 30 years of shogunate politics by developing an extremely accurate sense of when situations were becoming dangerous. He took his place at the head of the assembled supplicants and knelt. The ceremony began. Tomo led it in full ceremonial robes, white and deep crimson, immaculate, the haraguchi held with the authority of someone who had performed this rite 100 times without incident. She had not performed it without Kagen's spiritual presence enriching the ground beneath her for 20 years. None of them knew this. That was the point. He was in the forest, 2 hours north, in the hollow of his ancient cedar, his attention reaching through the fabric of the world with the ease of something that had been doing this since before the shrine's foundations were laid. He did not intervene. He did not act. He simply took back what had never been theirs. The first sign was the birds. Every bird in the shrine's garden rose simultaneously, not startled, not disturbed by sound or movement. They simply rose, all of them, in a single dark eruption of wings that crossed the courtyard wall and was gone. The silence they left behind had a specific quality. The silence of something absent that should have been present. Of a room from which all warmth has been removed while the furniture remains. Several of Lord Imagawa's retainers exchanged glances. Lord Imagawa himself did not move, but his eyes tracked the departing birds with the careful attention of a man cataloging information he did not yet have a framework for. Tomoe continued. She was a professional and did not break for birds. The second sign was the wind. It moved through the courtyard from no identifiable direction. Not strong, not dramatic, but wrong in a way that was difficult to articulate and impossible to dismiss. Cold in a manner that was not weather, touching each person with the sensation of being looked at by something that was not there. Every paper streamer at every gate moved, simultaneously, against the wind. A sound moved through the assembled retinue, low, collective, involuntary. The third sign was the fires. They did not gutter. They shrank, slowly, visibly, with a deliberateness that was somehow more disturbing than if they had simply gone out, dimming from their centers outward. Amber threw pale yellow through the thin, cold blue of a flame that has run out of everything to consume. Then out. Every sacred fire in the ceremonial grounds of the Yoshida Shrine, simultaneously, in the middle of the rite. The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the silence of a courtyard full of people who understood at the same moment that something was fundamentally and irrevocably wrong, and that none of them had a framework for what came next. Lord Imagawa rose from his position of supplication. He stood in the darkened ceremonial space and looked at the cold iron stands, looked at the altar, looked at Tomo, who stood before it with the haraguchi in her hands and nothing left to do with it. When he spoke, his voice was not raised. The courtyard was quiet enough that every word carried to every person in it. I have commissioned purification ceremonies at 11 shrines across 3 provinces, he said. I have performed this rite in drought, in the aftermath of battle, in the first days of mourning. I have stood in sacred spaces in every condition the world has presented me, and I have felt the gods attend. He paused. I do not feel them here. Tomoe said nothing. There was nothing the situation had left room for. His senior retainer reached within his formal robes and produced the document of patronage renewal, the commission that represented the shrine's most significant operational funding, the agreement that had been, until this morning, a formality, and placed it on the offering table with a deliberateness that every person in the courtyard understood completely. Unsigned. When the gods return to this place, Lord Imagawa said, you may send word. He walked toward the gate. His retinue followed. The noble households followed. The court officials and scribes and attendants, all of them, in the ordered sequence of people who understood which direction the situation had moved and had the political instinct to move with it. Within minutes, the ceremonial courtyard was empty. Empty except for the shrine's own people, standing among the cold iron stands and the unsigned document on the offering table, in a silence of what seemed like an aftermath. Of something that had finished happening and left the shape of itself behind. They returned to the residential hall in the manner of people moving through the dimensions of a disaster they had not yet finished measuring. The head priest went immediately to his private quarters. The junior priests gathered in low, urgent clusters. The Miko retreated to the women's hall. Tomo sat at the center of the room in her ceremonial robes. She had not found the will to remove them. Around her, the other Miko moved with the quiet care of people managing proximity to something they did not know how to address. She stared at the middle distance and assembled, piece by piece, the architecture of what had happened, and found that each piece fit against the others in a shape she was not prepared to name. The lamp nearest to her flickered. Just once. No draft, no movement in the air that could account for it. Then all the lamps flickered. Together. The temperature dropped. Not gradually. Between one breath and the next, the warmth of the room was simply elsewhere. What replaced it was not cold in the ordinary sense. Not the cold of weather or stone. The cold of a space that something vast was passing through. The chill of proximity to something so old that human warmth could not persist in its immediate presence. One of the younger Miko reached for the sleeve of the woman beside her. The lamps went out, not flickered out, not faded, out, between one moment and the next, as if they had simply been decided against. In the darkness, someone began to pray in a whisper. The old words. The words for protection. The words that shrine-trained practitioners reached for automatically when the situation exceeded the available frameworks. The words fell into the darkness and were absorbed by it. Something moved through the room. Later, those present would find that language failed them when they tried to describe it. It was not a sound exactly, more the pressure of a sound, felt in the sternum and the bones rather than heard through the ears. It had no single direction. It came from all walls simultaneously, as though the room itself had developed a voice. When it spoke, it did not sound like any human throat. It sounded like the space between one age of the world and the next. You were given a treasure. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Not earned, not deserved, not the product of your devotion or the careful maintenance of your grounds. A pause, in which the cold deepened and the darkness pressed slightly closer. Given. Placed in your keeping by intention, older than this shrine, older than the hierarchy that built it, older than the names you use for the things you claim to serve. Someone in the room was weeping. The sound was very small. She did not ask to be marked. The frost came then, beginning at the edges of the paper screens and spreading inward with slow deliberateness. Crystalline patterns blooming in the darkness, visible by the faint light the frost itself seemed to carry. Those nearest the walls watched it spread. The shapes it made as it moved inward were not random, not the branching chaos of ordinary frost. A starburst, again and again across every screen in the room, the same shape reproduced with the specificity of a signature. She did not ask to be set apart, to make you feel the smallness of what you are by simply existing in the same rooms. The voice moved through the floor now, through the wood beneath them, and several of those present felt it in their feet and could not make themselves move. The gods marked her before her birth. They placed their intention in her face where it could be seen, where it could not be mistaken. The frost covered the screens completely. The room was lit by it, cold luminescence with no source and no warmth. And you looked at the face of divine intention. The voice paused. The pause had the weight of everything that had ever been broken deliberately. And you called it unsightly. The word landed like a stone dropped from a great height. Her word, Tomoe's word, returned now with all the weight of what it had cost, multiplied by every year since it was first spoken, multiplied by everything that had been built on top of it. In the corner of the room, one of the junior Miko pressed her forehead to the floor in the posture of deepest supplication. She was not the only one. to diminish what the gods have marked, to exile what the gods have gifted, to look at what they placed in your keeping and call it a disruption to your comfort, to the careful maintenance of your own position. The voice dropped lower, deeper in frequency, deeper in the bones. Is not an institutional decision. The cold reached its deepest point. The breath of everyone in the room was visible, small clouds of vapor in the frost light. It is a sin against the ones who made you, against the world they charged you to serve, against every person who came to this shrine seeking the thin place between the human and the divine, and found it because she was here and will come again, and find it gone because you chose your comfort over your calling. Silence. The silence of a room full of people who have heard something true, set in a register that bypasses every capacity for reinterpretation, and have no defense against it. Let her mark be your answer. What happened to Tomo happened between one breath and the next. There was no warning, no build-up, no moment in which she might have moved or braced or called on 20 years of professional training. One moment, she was in the darkness with the others, in her ceremonial robes, in her room, in the shrine that had always organized itself around her. Then she was not. Then a scream. Her hands flew to her face. She pressed them against her left cheek, feeling the heat that had already passed. Not the heat of flame, but the heat of a decision that had already been finalized, a consequence that had already been written. The lamps relit. Everyone, simultaneously. In the light, those present saw Tomo's hands pressed against her face, saw the way she held them there, saw the shock in her eyes. She lowered her hands. The scar placed on the left side of her face was not grotesque, not the ruin of violence or the chaos of accident. It was deliberate, the only word that fit. Precise in the way that only intention could be precise. The kind of mark that carried its meaning in its shape rather than its damage. A starburst. Dark against her complexion, the skin slightly raised, exactly the color and texture of dark wood. Permanent and unmistakable in communicating directly, bypassing language, to every person in the room who had spent 9 years watching Shizuka cover the same shape with borrowed bangs. No one spoke. The younger Miko, who had attended the last dinner with Tomoe, looked at Tomo's face with an expression that contained several things simultaneously. Horror, grief, and underneath both of them, something she would not examine for days, something that lived in the same neighborhood as justice. The frost on the paper screens was gone, not melted. Gone, as if it had never been, leaving the screens intact, no trace of moisture. No evidence of anything unusual, except the mark on Tomo's face, which was not going anywhere. Outside, in the shrine garden, every dead branch of every tree bloomed simultaneously. White blossoms, out of season, impossible in the cold of late autumn. Petals opening and falling in the same moment, as if blooming and ending were one gesture, covering the swept stone paths in white. By morning they were gone. The only remaining evidence of what had occurred was what Tomo carried on her face, and the unsigned document still on the offering table in the cold ceremonial hall, and the dark iron stands where the sacred fires had not yet been relit. They would be relit eventually, but they would burn lower than before, and no amount of oil or prayer or professional attention would fully restore what they had been. The head priest would commission inspections, specialists, scholars of spiritual disturbance who charged considerably for their expertise. None of them would find anything actionable. None of them would be able to explain what had happened. What had occurred, they would eventually conclude, was a spiritual irregularity. The phrase would mean nothing and everything. Tomo would never lead another ceremony. Not because she was forbidden, no prohibition was issued, no formal consequence applied. But Lord Imagawa's withdrawal traveled through noble houses with the efficient thoroughness of people managing their associations carefully. A shrine whose kami had publicly abandoned a significant ceremony was a shrine to approach with caution. A head Miko bearing what appeared to be a mark of divine judgment was not a Miko whose intercession anyone wished to seek. She would remain at the shrine. She would perform administrative functions. She would sit in the common room with her seike and the greatly reduced architecture of her daily life. And she would carry on her face every single day the shape of what she had spent 9 years calling unsightly. And she would know why. That was the thing she could not reframe and could not manage into a more comfortable shape. She knew. Everyone who looked at her face knew. The sin had a name, and the name was written where it could be seen, where it could not be missed, where it could not be covered by borrowed bangs. Kagan was deep in his forest before the blossoms had finished falling. He moved through the trees the way he always moved, without effort, without sound, the forest acknowledging his passage the way it always had. He was home the way only very old things were home in places, not visiting, not inhabiting, simply being, the way the trees were, and the cold was, and the dark between the stars was. He found his cedar and sat within its hollow and was still. He had not done it for her. He examined this statement with the thoroughness it deserved, turned it over, tested its edges, held it against the full accounting of the past several days. He had done it because some things were wrong in a manner that centuries of existence made impossible to overlook. He had done it because he was old enough and powerful enough to correct fundamental wrongs when he found them, and he had found one, and he had corrected it. He had not done it for her. He sat with this for a long while. Through the trees, very faint, he could see the light of the lamp in the small shrine to the north. She had lit it before he returned. She rose before dawn without fail, beginning each day the same way regardless of whether anyone was watching. The purification rite, the old prayers, the systematic continuation of restoration, each day building on the previous one. He sat in his cedar and felt the forest around him, the accumulated awareness of centuries of shared existence. And he felt, underneath all of it, something he recognized but had not encountered in longer than he could accurately measure. Not contentment. He had had contentment over the years, the deep, neutral satisfaction of existing in a place that suited him, without want or urgency. This was different. This was the specific aliveness of something that had found, unexpectedly, something worth paying attention to. The sense of the morning as a thing that was happening rather than simply a thing that was passing. He did not examine it too closely. He would examine it when it became necessary, and not before. For now, he sat in his cedar and watched the light in the small shrine to the north, and listened to the silence that was not quite silence. That had her in it, and the old prayers, and the sound of something being rebuilt before dawn, by a woman who had decided that exile was not the same as ending. The forest was very still. The foxfire drifted. The morning came. Part 4. The weight of courtesy. He felt them enter the forest 3 days after his conversation with Shizuka. Not through the eastern boundary. They were too careful for that, too practiced in the specific etiquette of trespass between old powers to announce themselves through provocation. They came through the northern edge, where the trees were thinner and the foxfire ran less dense, and they moved through his forest with the deliberate restraint of people who had decided to behave themselves. For now. Kagan was at the old cedar when they arrived. He did not move. He extended his awareness through the forest the way he always extended it, completely, continuously, the way a man was aware of his own hands without having to look at them, and he counted them. 5. The outer 4 maintaining a perimeter that was courteous rather than aggressive, positioned at the compass points of the clearing, tails folded, foxfire dimmed, visitors announcing themselves rather than hunting, and 1 in the center. He rose from the cedar's hollow and walked toward the clearing. The clan leader was older than he looked. This was always true of fox spirits who had survived long enough to lead, but it was more pronounced in this one. He wore the appearance of a man perhaps 40 years of age, composed and well-made, with the ease of someone who had long since stopped having to perform authority and simply carried it. His robes were deep charcoal, understated, the kind of clothing that communicated wealth through the quality of the fabric rather than its decoration. His hair was bound. His hands were folded in front of him. He had 4 tails. 4 was significant. 4 was old enough to have genuine power, old enough to have accumulated the political acumen to lead, old enough to understand that the most effective thing to carry into a negotiation with something that had 7 tails was the appearance of absolute composure. He was standing in the center of the clearing when Kagan arrived, and he inclined his head with the precise degree of respect owed to something considerably more powerful than himself. Not submission, not flattery, the clean acknowledgement of a fact. Kagan stopped at the clearing's edge and regarded him. "Sato," he said. "Kagan." The clan leader's voice was pleasant, unhurried. "It has been some time. Not long enough." Sato smiled at this, genuinely, as though he found it mildly amusing, which he probably did. He had survived 4 centuries of clan politics in part by being genuinely difficult to offend. "No," he agreed. "I don't suppose it has been. May I?" He gestured toward a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. Kagan said nothing, which was answer enough. Sato sat, folding his robes with the habitual care of someone accustomed to wearing good things. He looked around the clearing, at the foxfire drifting between the old trees, at the dense accumulated weight of centuries of Kagan's presence in the bark and soil and air, and something in his expression acknowledged what it was acknowledging without making a performance of it. "You've built something real here," Sato said. "Over the years. That's not nothing. Say what you came to say." "I'm getting there." He was not rushed by this. He settled slightly on the log, adjusting the angle of his shoulders. A man making himself comfortable for a conversation he had decided would take as long as it took. We have been watching you for some years now. I think you know this. I know. And you know what we've been watching for. You want what I am, Kagan said. You have wanted it for decades. The answer has been the same for decades. The answer has been no, Sato agreed pleasantly, which is your right. A being of your age and power has every right to exist outside clan structure. We have respected this. A pause. The circumstances, however, have changed. The foxfire in the clearing dimmed slightly, not dramatically, barely perceptibly. The kind of change that only registered if you were already paying close attention. Sato was paying close attention. There is a woman, he said, at the shrine. Kagan said nothing. A Miko, Sato continued, exiled from the Yoshida hierarchy. She arrived some weeks ago. She has been rebuilding. He said this with the tone of someone acknowledging an unexpected development. She is remarkable, actually. The birthmark alone suggests a lineage we haven't seen active in over 2 centuries, and she has been growing steadily stronger since she began the restoration. He paused. Your proximity to her is not incidental to that growth. I think you know this too. Get to the point, Sato. The point, Sato said, is that your patterns have changed. You have been present near the shrine in a way you have not been present near anything in the hundreds years we have been watching this forest. He held Kagan's gaze with the calm of someone who has rehearsed this moment and found the rehearsal sufficient. We have been patient with your solitude. We have respected your refusal. We have maintained our boundary, and you have maintained yours, and there has been a kind of peace between us. And now you have something you didn't have before. Sato's voice did not change. It was still pleasant, still unhurried. The voice of a man discussing a matter of mutual interest rather than delivering a threat. That was the skill of it. The threat lived entirely in the content, never in the tone. And we have noticed. The clearing was very quiet. Join the clan, Sato said. Bring what you are into our structure. The terms are generous. I will show you the terms if you like. We have prepared them in considerable detail. You would not be a subordinate. A being of your power and age would be... No, Kagan said. Sato was quiet for a moment. He looked at his folded hands. I expected that answer, he said. I want you to understand that I did not come here expecting a different one. I came here to have a conversation that has the full weight of clarity on both sides. He looked up. Because I want you to understand, completely and without any ambiguity, what the alternative to yes looks like. The 4 foxes at the clearing's perimeter had not moved, had not shifted position, had not drawn foxfire, had not done anything that could be described as threatening. They were simply present for the moment. The woman is building a shrine, Sato said. It is a real shrine, from what our scouts report. The kami are attending her ceremonies. She has sealed the blood, or it has been sealed for her, which is why our initial assessments of her lineage took time. But the seal has been weakening since she arrived in your forest. He paused. She is becoming something. You know what she is becoming. And she does not yet know the full extent of what that means, which makes her manageable, for the moment. The foxfire in the trees had gone very still, not dimmed further. Simply still, the way things went still before something decided. If you join us, Sato said, she continues unmolested. She builds her shrine. She becomes what she is becoming. Whatever arrangement you have with her continues undisturbed. He let the pause do its work. He was good at pauses. You cannot touch her, Kagan said. His voice was even. She is on consecrated ground, the shrine boundary. The shrine boundary, Sato said gently, was constructed by a woman who has been practicing for 9 years and has been in your forest for a matter of weeks. It is a good boundary. For a human Miko of exceptional talent, it is a very good boundary. He tilted his head slightly. We have been practicing for considerably longer than 9 years. If anything crosses that boundary, nothing will cross it immediately, Sato said. We are not in the business of direct provocation, Kagan. We are patient. We are organized. We are willing to wait until the pressure of waiting becomes more persuasive than the comfort of refusing. He stood, smoothing his robes with that habitual care. We have time. We have always had time. The question is whether the woman at the shrine has enough of it. He inclined his head again, the same precise degree as before, the acknowledgement of a fact rather than a submission. Consider the terms, he said. I will leave them at the northern boundary. You have 2 weeks before we draw our own conclusions from your silence. He turned and walked toward the northern tree line. His 4 outriders fell in around him without a word, without a signal that Kagan could identify, the movement of people who had been doing this long enough that coordination required no instruction. They moved through the northern edge of the forest and were gone. The foxfire slowly returned to its ordinary drift between the branches. The clearing settled back into itself. The old cedar at its edge stood exactly as it had always stood, unmoved and unmovable, bark deepened to something close to stone by centuries of weather and foxfire, and the specific weight of a very old thing choosing to remain in one place. Kagan stood in the center of the clearing for a long time after they were gone. Nothing will cross it immediately. He thought about Shizuka at the altar with her hands folded. He thought about the stone path, relaid stone by stone. The borrowed bangs pushed back from the mark on her forehead on the day she walked into the eastern forest, the decision contained in that small gesture, the thing she was choosing to stop hiding even before she understood the full weight of what she was. Kagan thought about the terms Sato had left at the northern boundary, the scroll sitting against the roots of a birch tree he could feel from here, patient and deliberate, waiting to be read and considered and answered, thinking about the coldness of a leader who delivered threats in the tone of a merchant discussing trade arrangements, and the 4 centuries of practice it had taken to make that coldness feel like courtesy, and whether Sato had ever found anything in all that time that he valued enough to refuse to trade away. He thought about the answer to that question, and thought about the answer to a different question, which was what it said about him that he did not need very long to arrive at his own. He left the terms at the northern boundary unread and walked back toward the shrine. The foxfire followed him through the trees, gold and patient, the way it always had. He did not tell Shizuka about the meeting that night. Kagan told himself this was because she was in the middle of the evening prayers and interruption was discourteous. He told himself this was because the information would require context, and the context would require time, and the prayers should not be rushed. These things were true. They were not the reason. The reason was that she would ask him what he had answered, and he would have to tell her, and then she would understand how he truly felt, completely and immediately, the way she understood most things, and what his answer had cost her, what he had made her without asking the price of. He stood at the tree line and watched the lamp in the main hall burn its steady gold against the dark, and thought about how a person who had spent 9 years having their choices made for them by an institution would feel about having another choice made for them by something with better intentions and equally absent consultation. He thought about this for a long time. The lamp burned on. He told her in the morning. He waited until the prayers were finished and the offerings were arranged and she had her tea, and he sat across from her in the main hall in the gray morning light and told her all of it. Sato, the clearing, the terms at the northern boundary, the 2 weeks, what nothing will cross it immediately meant when said by someone patient enough to mean it. She listened without interrupting. She held her cup in both hands and looked at him with the full careful attention she gave everything that mattered, and she did not look away. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You said no," she said, not a question. "Yes." "Without asking me." "Yes," he said. She was quiet again. He waited, because he had learned over these weeks that her silences were not empty, and that the thing that came after them had always been worth waiting for. "The terms," she said finally. "What would joining them have meant for you?" He told her. The structure of it. The centuries of autonomy surrendered. The forest, his forest, hundreds of years of it, becoming a resource managed by committee. The specific death of everything a being became when it agreed to be directed by something lesser than itself for the sake of organizational convenience. She listened to all of it. "And you said no anyway," she said. "Yes." She set down her cup. She looked at the sacred fire burning in its stand. Her fire, rebuilt from nothing, burning with a steadiness that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with the decision, made every morning before dawn, to keep tending it. "You should have asked me," she said. "I know. I would have told you to say no," she said. "But you should have asked." "Yes," he said. "I should have." She was quiet for another moment. 2 weeks, she said. "Yes." "Then we have 2 weeks." She stood and straightened her robes and looked at him with those dark eyes that had looked at him directly since the first night, that had never flinched from what they found when they looked. "Don't keep things from me again. Whatever comes, I want to know it when it happens, not after." "Agreed," he said. She picked up the harigushi. "I have the morning rites," she said. "And then you can tell me everything you know about the clan's capabilities, because if they're coming, I intend to be ready." She walked to the altar. He stayed where he was for a moment, in the gray morning light of a hall she had built from ruins, watching her begin the prayers she said every single day because they were worth saying. He thought about Sato's composed face and the terms at the northern boundary, and the patience of something that had never found anything it couldn't afford to trade away. He thought about what the difference was between that and this. He already knew the answer. He went to stand at the perimeter. There was work to do. Part 5. The Names We Carry. The traveling priest arrived on a gray morning, when winter had found its footing in the forest and the stone path gleamed with frost that did not melt until past midday. Shizuka heard him before she saw him. Careful footsteps on the path from the village road. The sound of someone who had decided to come and was still negotiating whether to arrive. She set down the bundle of cedar branches she had been sorting and stood at the gate and waited. He came through the trees looking like the road had used him for several days. Perhaps 60, lean, with a face that had been to many shrines in many conditions and learned to read the spiritual temperature of a place before committing his full weight to it. When he saw her at the gate, his expression moved through several things before settling near recognition. She bowed, the greeting of one practitioner to another. He returned it. "I wasn't certain I'd find anyone here." "I wasn't certain you'd find the path," she said. "Come in. I have tea." He sat in the main hall with his hands wrapped around the cup and looked at what she had made of the shrine, the repaired altar, the rehung lanterns, the clean stone floor, the fresh shimenawa at the gate, with the expression of someone revising an assumption they had arrived with. "I heard there was someone at the old fox shrine," he said. The village seemed uncertain whether it was good news or not. "They're cautious," she said. "They'll come around." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You came from the Yoshida shrine." "I served there," she said simply. "Before I came here." "I thought so." He turned the cup in his hands. "I was there some weeks ago, passing north. I witnessed the seasonal purification ceremony." The air in the hall shifted. She felt the conversation arriving at what it had been building toward since the gate. "I heard it didn't go well," she said. The old priest told her everything. The birds first, everyone in the shrine's garden rising simultaneously, not startled by any sound or movement, simply leaving. All of them, at once. The wind, the way it moved through the courtyard from no direction that made sense, and about the fires dying, not guttering, not flickering out, but withdrawing, slowly and with a deliberateness that was more disturbing than if they had simply gone out. He told her about Lord Imagawa's face, about the unsigned document placed on the offering table, about the words that had followed. Then he told her what happened when they returned to the women's hall. The priest paused, his hands going still around the cup. He was not, she could tell, a man who shook easily. He had been shaken. "I was in the outer corridor," he said. "I could not hear all of it, but I heard enough." A pause. "And then I heard the Miko, Tomoe. What happened to her?" Shizuka was very still. "She carries something on her face now," he said, selecting each word with the care of someone handling something they were not certain of. "A mark, the shape of a starburst on her left cheek, dark against her skin, not like a burn, not like any wound I have seen before. Deliberate, as if it was placed there with intention." He paused. "Like a brand." The birthmark beneath Shizuka's bangs pulsed once, warm. The way it always pulsed during the deepest prayers, the sensation of a coal banked very deep, finding heat. "She will not lead ceremonies again," the old priest said. "Not because she was forbidden, simply because of what she carries, what she looks like now to anyone who comes seeking intercession." He was quiet for a moment. The shape it makes, and the color of it. Dark, not the color of purity, the color of something else. Shizuka sat with this. Her mark was white, the color of winter moonlight, of clean ash, of the space between one prayer and the next. She had been told for years that this was unsightly, and now Tomo wore the same shape in the opposite color on the left side of her face, and there was no ambiguity in what the difference meant. Purity marked one, consequence marked the other. The gods had been precise. "Are you all right?" the old priest asked. "Yes," she said, and then, because he had been honest and deserved honesty in return, "I served alongside Tomo." He nodded once. He had, she thought, already considered this. "The shrine's sacred fires," she said. "Do they still burn?" "They do," he said, "but diminished." He paused. "Something that was present is no longer." She thought about this for a long time and said nothing. When he left in the early afternoon, he stood at the gate and looked back at what she had made of the place. The path, the lanterns, the shimenawa, the smoke from the hall's brazier rising straight in the cold air. "The kami of this shrine," he said. "Do you feel them?" She considered honestly. "Not yet," she said, "but I feel that they are paying attention." He found this satisfactory. "I will tell people," he said, "that the path is passable, that there is a Miko here who keeps it." "I would be grateful," she said. She stood at the gate long after his footsteps faded, her hands folded, looking at the road north. She did not allow herself to think directly about what manner of thing might have made the journey south on her behalf. Kagen was centuries old and had walked through her purification attempt like morning fog. To him, the workings of the Yoshida Shrine and its hierarchies were the small concerns of short-lived people, barely worth a second thought. Whatever had happened in that women's hall, she would not presume to place herself at the center of the reason for it. She had learned, across years of service, the cost of assuming herself remarkable. She was a Miko in an abandoned shrine she had been sent to disappear in. That was the fact of it. She went inside. That evening the wrongness began. Not dramatic, not the sudden arrival of something that announced itself. It came the way the most careful things came, at the edges of perception. Shizuka felt it when she rose before dawn for the morning prayers. The forest's attention, which had become over these weeks as familiar to her as the weight of the haraguchi in her hands, was oriented differently. Not toward the shrine as it usually was. Outward. Toward the southern and eastern edges of the forest, with the focused quality of something that had detected a change in the perimeter and was assessing it. She extended her spiritual awareness carefully, the way she tested uncertain ground, gently, without committing her full weight until she understood what she was standing on. What she found was not Kagen. She had learned the texture of his presence over these weeks, the deep, unhurried weight of something centuries old, the cool signature of ancient foxfire. This was different, lighter, more agitated, the impression of something that was trying not to be noticed and succeeding reasonably well, but not with the depth of age that would have made the concealment complete. Something skilled, something watching, something interested in the shrine. She spent the morning reinforcing the boundary, salt and sacred rope and the old words for barriers, working methodically around the entire perimeter, taking her time, doing it properly. When she finished, she stood at the center of the grounds and felt the boundary settle into place, more substantial than before. Not sufficient to stop something truly powerful, but sufficient to tell her if anything tried to cross. The Watcher, she thought. Sato had told Kagen that nothing would cross the boundary immediately, that the clan was patient, organized, willing to wait. He had also sent someone to observe. The two things were consistent with each other. In the evening, when the foxfire appeared in the trees at its usual hour, she walked to the tree line. "Something has been watching the shrine," she said to the forest. "It has been there since at least this morning. It isn't you." The foxfire drifted. The darkness held its silence. "I know you can hear me," she said. A pause. Then Kagan's voice came from somewhere in the trees, not close, further than usual. "I know." "What is it?" "A watcher," he said. "A fire spirit, old enough to conceal itself. I have been tracking it along the forest's edge for 2 days." A pause. "It has been drawing closer to the shrine." "Sato's," she said. "Yes." "What does it want?" "To understand what you are," he said, "and to find a way to use that." She stood with this. "Will it approach?" A silence. "I don't know yet. It is careful, patient, consistent with how Sato operates. Observe first, move when the picture is complete." Another pause, and something in the quality of it changed. "Be cautious. Whatever comes to this shrine in the next days, be cautious." She waited for more. He said nothing further. She went back inside and thought about caution, and what, precisely, she was supposed to be cautious of. 3 days later, in the gray hour before dawn, she heard footsteps on the path from the village road. Not Kagan's footsteps. He moved without sound when he chose to, and when he did make noise, it was the deliberate courtesy of something announcing itself. These footsteps had the irregular rhythm of someone managing the last stretch of a long road on the last of their strength. Uneven. Real. She stood at the gate and waited. He came through the trees in the half-dark, and she looked at him the way she looked at everything that approached her threshold, thoroughly, without committing to a response until she had what she needed. Young, perhaps 19, perhaps 20, with a face that even exhausted and travel-worn would have been worth a second look. Dark hair loose around his shoulders, robes damp at the hems from the morning frost, one hand pressed to the gatepost for support. He looked up at her with the particular emptiness of someone whose energy had been spent completely, nothing left for performance. "I saw the lanterns from the road," he said. "I've been walking since yesterday morning." She extended her spiritual awareness toward him, careful and deliberate. What she felt was warmth, a bright, high-frequency spiritual signature, the kind she had encountered in practitioners of genuine gift. Spiritually sensitive, real. Warmer than most humans she had known, but that alone was not suspicious. Some people simply burned brighter. Then she thought of Kagan's warning. She thought of the watcher Sato had placed at the forest's edge. Patient, skilled, old enough to divide its presence. This young man was not cold. He was not concealed. He stood in the open with frost in his hair and his full weight on a gatepost, and what she felt from him was the simple, legible warmth of exhaustion. She offered him rest. She did not stop watching. His name was Ren. He offered it on the second day, when he had gotten rest and food in exchange for work, and she believed the name the way she believed most of what he told her, partly, and with her eyes open. Years of service at the Yoshida Shrine had taught her to detect when stories were woven together rather than simply told, and Ren's had the occasional seam of something constructed. But his hands were real when they lifted stones, and his attention was real when he listened, and the warmth she felt from him in a room was not manufactured. The question was never whether some part of it was genuine. The question was which parts. He was easy. That was the word she kept returning to when she tried to account for what his presence in the shrine felt like. Easy warmth, genuine laughter, the attentiveness of someone who was actually listening rather than managing the time until it was his turn to speak. He helped carry stones from the path restoration without being asked, and swept the outer hall with the matter-of-fact thoroughness of someone who had grown up in a place where sweeping simply needed doing. He knew the old prayers. This was the first thing that gave her pause, not the prayers themselves, since many travelers had picked up fragments of formal prayer from shrines across their routes, but the depth of his knowledge. The old forms, the ones that had not been in common use in generations. When she began the morning rite on his third day, she heard him in the outer hall, very quietly, following along with the words she was speaking. She kept her voice even and continued the rite and filed this with the other things she was collecting. He was interested in her birthmark, not the way the Yoshida priests had been interested, not the assessing attention of people cataloging a problem. Something more personal than that, something more searching. When she caught him looking at the place where her bangs covered the mark, there was recognition in his face, the expression of someone who was seeing what he had come to find. She pushed her bangs forward and kept working. "You've been trained somewhere formal," he said, on the fourth day, watching her set the offerings on the altar. "The way you hold the haraiguchi, that's not something people learn from fragments." "I served at a shrine," she said, "before I came here." "Which one?" "It doesn't exist anymore," she said. "Not in the way it did." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry." She looked at him. There was nothing in his face that resembled insincerity. She went back to the offerings. "You shouldn't cover it," he said. Shizuka set a dish of salt on the altar and did not answer. "The mark," he said, "the one you cover. Whatever it is, you shouldn't hide it. I can feel it through the bangs. I've been able to feel it since I came through the gate." He paused. "It gets stronger when you pray. stronger than anything I've ever been near. She turned and looked at him directly. He met her eyes without flinching, no longer performing ease, no longer performing anything. What remained when the performance dropped was complicated, wanting, and something beneath the wanting that she recognized as real, and beneath that something she had not yet named, but was beginning to suspect was older than this visit and more deliberate. "What you are," he said quietly, "is remarkable." She turned back to the altar. "Finish the cedar sorting," she said. "The outer building still needs bundling." He went. Shizuka stood with her hands on the offering table and thought about warmth that could be felt through bangs, about prayers known to a depth that travelers didn't carry, about a clan head who had told Kagan she was nothing to concern himself with, and about what it meant that someone had still been sent here, to her regardless. She thought about all of it very carefully. Kagan appeared at the main hall entrance on the 5th day. Shizuka was resetting the altar cloth. Ren was in the courtyard correcting stones in the path she had relaid when she first arrived. He had noticed two had shifted in the frost and corrected them without being asked, which she had noticed and filed with everything else. Kagan materialized at the threshold the way he always materialized, without warning, and his gaze moved past her through the open interior corridor to the courtyard where Ren knelt over the pathstones. Something moved through his expression that she had not seen from him before, something that lived in the neighborhood of deliberate restraint. He was very still, more deliberately still than usual, which she was learning to read. Ren stood from the pathstones and turned, and for a moment the two of them simply looked at each other across the courtyard. The young man in travel-worn robes, dark hair loose, and the thing at the hall entrance with the color of old gold. Something passed between them, but Keegan noticed that Ren didn't seem to react to what he was. Keegan was hoping that if he presented himself as the yokai he was, he would flee. Ren didn't. She felt it without being able to name it precisely. The recognition of two things in the same space that had identified each other, also noticing that Red didn't react to Kagan the way most people would. Then Ren turned back to the pathstones, unhurried. His shoulders were very deliberately relaxed. Kagan looked at her. His expression did not communicate what he was thinking. It never did, precisely. But she had been reading him for weeks, and what she read now was the look of something that was not yet certain of what it had found and was being careful because of it. He turned and was gone. That evening she went to the tree line. "You saw him," she said. "Yes. He didn't react to me. That is unusual for a human. He could be like me, familiar with those like yourself." A long pause. "I am not certain. There is warmth in him that is not ordinary. But what I feel when I look at him is not what I feel when I track the watcher at the perimeter." Another silence. "They are not the same texture." Could he be hiding it? Perhaps. Something that old and that practiced could manage a disguise that divided. One signature for distance observation, another for proximity. He paused. Or he could be what he appears, a gifted traveler who happened to find the shrine. "That seems unlikely," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "It does." She stood at the boundary in the dark and thought about the prayers Ren knew and the warmth she felt when she entered a room he was already in, and the way his face had changed for just a moment when she said the shrine no longer existed in the way it did. "I'll watch him," she said. "Watch carefully," Kagan said. She went back inside. Behind her, at the edge of the tree line, she felt Kagan's presence orient itself away from the forest's usual perimeter and toward the shrine, not watching the boundary, watching the inner grounds. She filed this too, along with everything else. On the 6th morning, she rose before dawn and found Ren already awake. He sat in the outer corridor with his back against the wall and his knees drawn up, looking out through the open end of the corridor at the courtyard and the gate and the dark of the forest beyond. He had heard her come in. She saw him register her footsteps, but he did not move or turn. She brought tea and sat across from him in the cold, and they sat together for a while without speaking, which was not uncomfortable. It had never been uncomfortable, she realized, and she had taken that as a point in his favor. Now she was less certain what to do with it. "You're not sleeping," she said. "I sleep enough." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "I've been thinking." About. He was quiet for a moment. About why I came here. She looked at him. I told you I saw the lanterns from the road, he said. That's true, I did see them. He paused. I didn't tell you I had been looking for them. The courtyard was very still. The foxfire in the tree line had not yet appeared. I had been told, he said carefully, that there was something in this forest worth finding. Something that hadn't been seen in a long time. He turned the cup in his hands. I was told it would be here. Who told you? She said. People I work for, he said. Or worked for. The distinction is getting harder to maintain. She looked at him for a long moment. And what were you sent to find? He met her eyes, and for the first time in 6 days, the ease of his expression was simply gone. Not replaced with something threatening, not cold, just honest. The face of someone who had stopped performing because the performance had become unsustainable. You, he said. I was sent to find you. Part 6. Fire and Ice. Shizuka did not move. She did not reach for the harigushi or begin a prayer. She sat with her tea in the cold of the corridor and looked at him and took the full measure of what she was seeing. Ren was not performing ease anymore. He was not performing anything. What remained when the performance dropped was complicated. Want and guilt and something that lived deeper than either. Something she recognized as real, despite everything she now knew surrounded it. Sato sent you, she said. Not a question. Something crossed his face. Surprise, then recalibration. You know his name, he said. Kagan told me. Sato came to this forest weeks ago. 4 of his people at the perimeter. Sato himself in the center of the clearing. He made his proposition. Kagan refused. She held his gaze. He told me everything that was said, including that the clan had no interest in me, that I was leverage, not the objective. Ren was quiet for a moment, not gathering his thoughts, but deciding. She could see it plainly now that his face had stopped managing itself, how much truth he was going to give. She watched him find the answer. He lied, Ren said. The words fell into the cold between them and did not move. You are the objective, he said. You were always the objective, both of you, but you first. Your mark, your lineage, what you are becoming. Kagan and yourself are tools to use for more power. Sato has aspirations. He looked at her with the full, unguarded attention of someone who had decided the time for management was over. When Sato told him the clan had no interest in you yourself, that was the architecture of the whole arrangement. Keep Kagan believing he was the primary threat. Keep him watching the perimeter, reinforcing the boundary, managing that specific danger while Sato positioned his real approach directly to you, then use you to control Kagan. She was quiet with this, feeling the shape of it settle into her the way the worst truth settled, not with violence, but with the slow, irreversible weight of something finding its permanent place. He sent you here specifically, she said. For me. Yes, to assess me, to get close, to report back what I was becoming, and if possible, to bring you to them, Ren said. Then use you to bring Kagen, in that order. A pause. The commission was clear. You were the priority. His participation was the larger prize, but you were the door to it. He told Kagan you were nothing to concern himself with, because a man who believes the threat is about him stops looking carefully at what's beside him. She set her cup down. While I don't deny that Keegan may care for me, but I'm human. My life is not with that mark, Ren stated. And trust me, Keegan is marking you as a mate, but your humanity has prevented you from recognizing the signs. He cares very much how close Sato gets. You have been in my shrine for 6 days, she said. You have eaten at my table and said the morning prayers and helped relay stones in my path. You came through my gate with my trust, and you have been reporting to a man who lied to Kagan's face, who used decades of good faith between them to keep him looking in the wrong direction while positioning you inside this shrine. Her voice was very even. And now you are telling me this. Why? He was quiet for a long time. Because what I was sent to do and what I actually want to do have stopped being the same thing, he said finally. They may have stopped being the same thing before I came through your gate. He looked at the courtyard, at the dark of the forest beyond it. I have been watching you for weeks. From the perimeter. I felt your power building before I arrived. I felt what the mark does when you pray." He paused. "What I feel has nothing to do with the commission. That is the truth. I need you to know that. Whatever else is true, that part is real. What you feel," she said, "does not change what you did. It does not change that you entered this shrine under false pretenses, that you have been feeding information to a man who lied to Kagan's face about his intentions toward me, who has been using Kagan's own good faith as the mechanism of his deception." A pause. "Real feelings do not override real choices." Something in his face accepted this. "I know," he said. Then he stood, slowly, and she stood with him, and the warmth of his presence in the corridor shifted, intensifying, not threatening, the involuntary response of a fire spirit whose control was fraying at the edges. There was something in the way he looked at her now that was different from anything she had cataloged across the 6 days. Not the easy warmth, not the guilt of the confession. Something older and more fundamental. The thing beneath all of it that the performance had been built to contain. "I will not go," he said, "and I need you to understand why." "Ren." Not because of Sato, not because of the commission. His voice had dropped, warmer now, carrying something beneath the words she felt in her sternum before she heard it with her ears. "I came here for the clan, and I stayed because of you. The difference matters more than anything else I can tell you." The warmth in the corridor climbed by a degree, then another. "What I feel when I'm near you is not something I can walk into that forest and simply stop. It doesn't work that way. Not for what I am. Not when it's this." He looked at her the way fire looked at the thing it had decided to consume. Not in violence, but with a total, unhurried certainty. "I want you," he said. "Not for them. Not as a vessel for their ambitions. As mine." The word hung in the cold air between them. In the tongue of the old spirits, it was not casual. It was a claim. A mate claim, lodged openly, in the manner of fire spirits who had decided and were stating the decision the way they stated facts. No negotiation encoded in it, only the declaration and the expectation of what followed. Shizuka understood exactly what had just happened. "You cannot claim someone who has not chosen you," she said. "I can wait," he said. "I have the time. You are standing in my shrine making a claim on my person after 6 days of deception. That is not waiting." She kept her voice level. She could not stop him if he managed to close the distance between them, and they both knew it. "And Kagan doesn't know what you've just told me, that the lie was about me, that I was always a target." "Kagan," Ren said, and for the first time she heard an edge in him, not anger, but the specific heat of a fire spirit whose patience had reached its limit, "is not here." The warmth climbed again. Around them, the dry timber walls of the corridor began to speak to the heat, a low creak, almost inaudible, the sound of old wood at the edge of its tolerance. She felt it before she heard it, through the floor and the altar and the sacred fire 20 feet away, the whole familiar structure of what she had rebuilt, sending up a quiet alarm. She reached for the banishment prayer. The words came clearly. The old form, the precise syllables, the intention behind them clean and cold and absolutely meant. She directed it at him with the full force of everything she was. The mark ignited. Not the prayer. Not the training. The thing beneath both of them, older than the Yoshida shrine and all its management of who she was permitted to be, came up through her in a wave of white light that was clean and certain and had never in her life been given full reign before this moment. It hit Ren squarely, and he was thrown back against the corridor wall with a force that cracked the wood behind him. But he did not go down. She watched him catch himself against the wall, one hand pressed to his chest where the light had struck, something in his expression between pain and awe. And then the warmth in the corridor stopped being ambient. It became deliberate, organized. The concentrated heat of a fire spirit removing its restraint. And she understood in that moment that she had been feeling Ren's presence at a fraction of what it actually was. The warmth she had mistaken for the natural radiance of a gifted traveler was the muted form. The air between them shimmered. The walls of the corridor were dry wood. The sacred fire in the main hall, 20 feet away, surged 3 feet into the air. "You shouldn't do that," he said, crossing the space between them. "I'm not here to hurt you." "If you had no intention of forcing your will on me," she said, holding her ground, "you would leave as I asked." "You don't understand what I'm offering." "I understand exactly what you're offering, and I understand the difference between offering and taking." She held his gaze. "Go." He reached out and pushed her bangs back from her forehead. It was not violent. It was gentle, in fact, his fingers barely touching her skin. But it was uninvited, and it crossed the distance she had held, and the mark blazed the moment contact was made. Not from his touch, but from her response to it, the power surging the way it always surged when something pressed against what was hers. She stepped back. He followed. "I am not leaving," he said, and his voice had dropped into something she felt in her sternum, beneath language, the register of something old declaring its intention. "I know what you are, and I know what you're becoming, and I know that what I feel when I'm near you is not something I can walk away from. Come with me, not to the clan, away from all of it. I can show you what you're becoming. No one else here knows what you are. No one else will." She began the second line of the prayer. Then the wall of the main hall came down, not collapsing, not falling. It came apart deliberately, as if its foundations had simply been informed they were no longer needed. The timber split outward in both directions, and what filled the space it left was cold. The absolute cold of something old arriving at speed, contracting the air in the corridor so sharply that the shimmer of Ren's heat became visible. A bright distortion caught suddenly in a field of freezing dark. Kagan stood in the space where the wall had been. All 7 tails, foxfire blazing at each tip in a deep gold that threw shadows in directions shadows should not go. His eyes were not the quiet gold of the tree line. They were the reddish gold of something that had been containing itself for a very long time and had just released the container entirely. He had heard. She understood this from his stillness. Not just the fight, not just the threat to the shrine, the lie of what Sato had done to him, used against him, turned into architecture without his knowledge. He had sat across from Sato in that clearing and believed completely that he was the primary target. And Sato had let him believe it, and the belief had kept him watching the perimeter while his real approach walked through the gate. He looked at Ren. What passed between them in the next moment was not a negotiation. It was 2 entities recognizing each other's nature, determining in the silent language of what they were and whether what came next would be a conversation or a fight. Ren made his decision first. The heat he released was not the warmth she had felt in the corridor over 6 days. It was fire stripped of its social pretense, wild, concentrated, the accumulated force of a spirit whose lineage ran back to the deepest furnaces of the Earth's interior. It hit Kagan in a wall of flame that would have reduced a human practitioner to ash and sent senior priests running from their shrines. Kagan stepped into it. The cold of him met the fire of Ren, and the corridor became a place where 2 fundamental forces of the world argued over the same ground. The foxfire at Kagan's tails blazed outward, and Ren's heat pressed back. And for a moment, one real, terrifying moment, neither of them yielded. Shizuka pressed herself against the far wall and reached for the sacred fire with her awareness, drawing it toward her, not as a weapon, but as a shield, wrapping it around the altar, around the oldest things in the shrine that could not be replaced, pulling it tight against every surface she had rebuilt with her own hands. Ren was fast. She had not understood how fast. He moved through the corridor the way fire moved through a building, present in one place and then present in another, with no legible transition between. He was inside Kagan's reach before Kagan had fully turned, and the heat he released at that range was concentrated enough that she saw the foxfire contract. Saw, for the first time, the cold of Kagan pressed back. But it was not only combat. In the way Ren moved, the constant pull of his attention back toward where she stood even as he fought. She understood that the mate claim was not rhetoric. He was fighting for it, the way old spirits fought for things they had decided were theirs, completely, at full capacity, with the particular ferocity of something that understood the alternative to winning was losing her. And on the other side of the corridor, she felt what she had been slowly learning to read in Kagen. Not the cold fury of a territory being challenged, but something beneath that. Something he had not needed to name until this moment placed it in sharp relief. He was not only fighting to defend his forest. Kagen caught Ren's wrist. The foxfire that burned in that grip, meeting the nature of a fire spirit, was not an explosion. It was worse. It was the sustained pressure of two forces occupying the same point, finding out which had more foundation. Ren's face went white. He pulled. He could not pull free. But he did not stop fighting. His free hand came up, and the heat that poured from it struck Kagen across the side with enough force to stagger him. One step back, the foxfire at his left tail's guttering. And Ren used that step to twist free, to create distance, to send another concentrated burst that took out the rear wall of the corridor in a spray of burning timber. She caught the burning pieces with the sacred fire before they could reach the altar cloth. The fight moved into the courtyard. Kagen in full form in the open space was a different thing entirely. The forest responded to him, foxfire in the tree line blazing upward, the cold of the old trees pressing inward toward the grounds, the earth communicating something she felt through the soles of her feet. His tails spread, all seven, and the cold they carried was not merely weather. It was the cold of centuries of accumulated existence, of a being so deeply rooted in this specific ground that the concept of removal had lost all meaning. Ren felt this. She watched him feel it, watched the calculation behind his eyes update as he understood fully what he was fighting and what it was protecting. He was still fast. He was still burning, moving through the courtyard the way fire moved through a building, finding the points of weakness, the gaps in the cold, the angles where Kagen's attention was divided. He had not been alive long enough to match Kagen in accumulated force, but he was close enough to make every step of ground cost something. Then Kagen stopped trying to contain him. It happened without announcement. He simply released the last of what he had been holding back, and the cold that flooded the courtyard was not the cold of winter or altitude. It was the cold of deep time. Ren's fire met it. For 3 full seconds, it held. Then the cold found the edges of the fire and pressed, and Ren's flame went inward, contracting, fighting to maintain its center. His expression was not the face of someone who had lost, but of someone who had found the absolute limit and was choosing what to do with it. His eyes found her across the courtyard. She had wondered what he would look like in this moment. She had expected defiance, a last gesture. What she saw instead was simply him, Ren, without the performance and without the commission and without the careful warmth he had deployed for 6 days, looking at her with the expression of something that had found what it wanted and was about to lose the chance of it permanently. Even now he looked at her, not at Kagen. Then the foxfire took him. The courtyard went silent. Kagen's tails settled, one by one, from blazing to burning to the low, steady drift she knew from the tree line. The cold receded, not gone, but no longer filling the space like a presence. Around them, only winter remained, only a courtyard. Shizuka stood at the far end of it, with her hands steady and the sacred fire coiled around her palms, and she breathed. Kagen turned to find her. They sat in the main hall, in the damage of it, the broken wall, the scattered altar stones she had already begun to resettle out of habit, the foxfire drifting through the gaps in the timber where the cold came in. He was wounded. She had seen it during the fight, a second injury joining the first at his left shoulder, both the kind of damage that took time even for something like him. He sat across from her without ceremony, without the careful distance he had maintained at the tree line for months, and she looked at him directly for the first time since she had stopped pretending that what she observed at the forest's edge was purely a spiritual concern. "He lied to you," she said, "when he came to the clearing. He told you he had no interest in me myself, that I was leverage." "Yes," Kagen said. The word was very flat, and we were both the objective. "Yes." Something moved in his face that was not quite anger. Something older and more controlled than anger. The expression of something that had just recalibrated a certainty it had held for weeks. The coldness of a man who had sat across from Sato in the clearing and believed completely, a statement designed to be believed. "I told you everything he said. I repeated his words to you. and one of them was a lie constructed precisely so I would repeat it. So I would carry it back to you, and you would believe you were safe from their primary attention. He was very still. He used my honesty to deliver his deception. She sat with this, the shape of it, the precision of it. "What am I?" she said. Not the question she had asked on her first night in this hall, when she had stood at the altar and felt the enormity of something old pressing up through the ground beneath her feet. A different question entirely. The question of why she was worth that level of construction. Why a clan head would lie to a centuries-old Kitsune's face rather than simply send his people to take what he wanted. Kagan looked at her, and something settled in him, not relaxed, but present in the way he was present when he was about to say something that had been accumulating for a long time. "Your lineage does not begin with the Yoshida shrine," he said. "The mark you carry is not a birthmark. It is not a spiritual accident." He folded his hands in his lap, a gesture she had not seen from him before. There are records older than the Yoshida family, older than the shrine itself, that describe the women who have carried it. Generations of them, always the same shape and color. Mikos mostly, because the families that carried it were drawn to sacred work, but not always. The mark is the sign of a lineage that has been in a compact with the divine for longer than there have been shrines built to contain such things. Shizuka did not move. "The compact is this," he said. "The women who carry the mark are conduits, not diminished by that word, not containers waiting to be used, but the opposite. Built for divine power to move through without burning the carrier to nothing. Most practitioners who reach for the level of power you have access to spend their lives managing the fact that the human body was not constructed for it. The mark means yours was." A pause. "You are what happens when a lineage that has been in that compact for centuries produces someone at full strength. The Yoshida priests recognized this and spent years teaching you to minimize it, because what you carry would have dwarfed their institutional authority inside a decade." She thought of the harvest ceremony, the sky answering, every kami within 10 miles arriving at once, drawn by something she had not known she was releasing. She thought of years of bangs pushed forward, of making herself small, of patience offered to an institution that had been quietly afraid of her from the beginning. "And the clan," she said. "A conduit of your strength, bonded to a clan's purpose, would make that clan the dominant spiritual authority in this region within a generation," he said. "Sato has been building toward this for decades, watching your family, waiting for the mark to emerge at full strength. When you were removed from the Yoshida shrine, he knew before you arrived in this forest. The clearing, the proposition, the terms he left at the northern boundary. All of it was designed to keep me occupied with the threat I believed was about me. The sacred fire burned in its stand across the damaged hall. She had protected it through the fight without thinking, had held it while the corridor burned and the walls came down, keeping it burning with the same steadiness she brought to everything that mattered. It burned now with the unconcerned certainty of something that had never doubted it would. "You knew," she said, "about the lineage, before Sato ever came to the clearing." The pause was honest. "I knew the mark was not ordinary. I had seen something like it once in the early Heian period. A woman at a river's edge calling down rain. I recognized the signature of it in you from the tree line. I knew there was something in you that did not match what Sato described." He met her eyes steadily. "I chose to watch, not to contain you for them, for my own reasons. Because from the first morning you stood in this hall and spoke the old prayers to a shrine that had not been kept in decades, I wanted to understand what you were." A pause. "I should have told you what I suspected. Instead, I held it while I decided how certain I was, and Sato used that space." She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood and crossed to where he sat, and he watched her come with the stillness of something that had decided not to move until it understood where she was going. She knelt in front of him. She did not ask. She simply took his hand away from the wound at his side and looked at it herself, then reached for the bowl of salt water she had already prepared. Because she had been a Miko long enough to prepare these things before she knew she would need them. He let her. She worked carefully, methodically, the way she worked at everything. With complete attention, without performance. He was very still under her hands, observing every one of her features. When she had done what could be done, she sat back on her heels and looked up at him. He reached out, slowly, the way you'd move a curtain to see what was behind it, permission built into the gesture itself, and pushed her bangs back from her forehead. She held still. His thumb traced the edge of the white birthmark. Not possessively. Not with the assessing interest of someone cataloging what they had found. The way you touched something that had been there a long time, and that you were only now, finally, seeing clearly. The foxfire at the tips of his tails blazed briefly, involuntary, the response of something that had been containing itself, and then settled. Through the mark, she felt it, warm and deep, and absolutely certain of its direction. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "All of it. You had a right to know what you were carrying." "Yes," she said, "I did." He did not look away, neither did she. "I am telling you now," he said. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, keeping it against her face. His fingers curved slightly, adjusting, not pulling away, not pressing in, simply present. The sacred fire sent a thread of warmth across the hall, and the foxfire answered it. And the old forest outside the broken wall went perfectly, completely still, the way it went still when something in it had been decided. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "The corridor wall," she said finally. "You owe me a wall." A smile slowly grew across his face. "Yes," he said. "I do." Part 7. The Kitsune, the Miko, and the door. Shizuka followed the faint trail between the cedars until the ground leveled into a clearing unlike any she had seen before. Nothing about it demanded attention. There were no stone gates or weathered shrines hidden beneath the trees, no forgotten altar waited beneath vines, and no ancient monument marked the place as sacred. It looked ordinary. The clearing was small, bordered by cedar roots that had slowly risen above the earth over hundreds of years. Moss covered nearly every stone, and shafts of pale winter light filtered through the branches overhead. She would have walked past it without a second glance if Kagan had not stopped. "This is where it is," Kagan said. She looked around once more. "I still don't see anything." "I know," Kagan replied. He spoke without disappointment, as though he had expected her answer. For a long moment, he simply stood beside her, his eyes moving slowly across the clearing. "I've come here more times than I can remember." She looked at him. "Every few decades, I convinced myself I had overlooked something." He smiled faintly. "A hidden passage, a shrine beneath the earth, a doorway concealed by illusion. And you never found one?" "I always found exactly what you're seeing now," Kagan answered. He stepped into the clearing and crouched beside one of the cedar roots. "When I was younger, I hated mysteries I couldn't solve." "You?" His quiet laugh surprised her. "I wasn't always patient." She found herself smiling. "It took me a very long time to understand that I was asking the wrong question." "What changed?" "I stopped looking for a door." Kagan rested one hand against the exposed root. "And I began asking why I believed there had to be one." He remained silent for several moments before continuing. "Over the centuries, I heard stories from wandering priests and shrine keepers. Some came from forgotten temples. Others came from families who had served the old kami long before written records were common." "Were they talking about this place?" "They didn't always know they were." He glanced toward her. "They spoke of women marked with a white star." Shizuka instinctively brushed her fingers across the hair covering her forehead. "They appeared only once every few generations," Kagan continued. "Some served shrines, others lived ordinary lives. Yet whenever the stories mentioned the eastern forest, they always ended the same way." "How?" "The women entered," Kagan said. "And?" He slowly shook his head. "No one knew." She frowned. "No one?" "The people who recorded the stories only knew that the women returned, changed," Kagan explained. His voice grew thoughtful. "One old monk wrote that they walked with the forest afterward instead of through it. Another claimed they could hear prayers carried on the wind from villages days away." "And you believed them?" "I wasn't sure." He smiled to himself. "I've lived long enough to know that legends usually begin with something true." Kagan looked across the clearing again. "After enough stories, I realized they were all describing the same place." "The place we're standing in." "Yes." Shizuka turned slowly, studying every tree and every stone. It doesn't feel extraordinary. It didn't until you arrived. She looked back at him and asked, "What changed?" "You did." Kagan's answer carried no drama. It was simply the conclusion he had reached after centuries of searching. "I've stood in this clearing alone countless times." He paused before continuing. "The moment you stepped into it, the forest became quiet." Only then did Shizuka notice it. The breeze still stirred the branches overhead, but the familiar sounds of the forest had faded. Birdsong had disappeared. Even the distant stream she had crossed only minutes before could no longer be heard. It wasn't frightening. If anything, it reminded her of entering a shrine moments before the first prayer of the morning, when everyone instinctively fell silent without anyone asking them to. The forest was waiting. Kagan noticed her expression. "You feel it now?" She nodded. "What happens next?" "I honestly don't know," he replied. For the first time since she had met him, Kagan looked uncertain. "I know where the stories begin." Kagan's golden eyes met hers. "I've spent centuries trying to learn how they end." Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. The answer had been waiting here far longer than either of them. Shizuka took a slow breath and stepped into the center of the clearing. Almost immediately, warmth spread beneath the white mark hidden by her bangs. She stopped walking. The sensation wasn't painful. It reminded her of standing near the sacred fire during winter prayers, when the heat reached her skin before she consciously noticed it. The warmth grew stronger. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the clearing looked exactly the same. Only one thing had changed. She could no longer see Kagan. Shizuka remained exactly where she was. Her first instinct was to turn around. She took 2 quick steps toward the edge of the clearing, expecting to see Kagan waiting where she had left him. Instead, she found only trees. The cedar that had stood beside him was still there, its roots twisting over the earth exactly as before. But Kagan was gone. She frowned and walked farther. The clearing should have ended several paces ago. It didn't. She stopped. Looking over her shoulder, she could still see the center of the clearing behind her. Ahead, the forest stretched on without interruption. Somehow, she had walked beyond the place where Kagan had been standing, yet she had never crossed its boundary. A strange thought crossed her mind. She wasn't trapped. Distance itself had changed. A flicker of movement caught her eye. A small bird darted between the branches overhead, wings beating in a quick, frantic rhythm. There was no sound, not the rush of air, not the whisper of feathers. Nothing. Shizuka's breath caught. She opened her mouth without thinking. "Kagan!" Her voice vanished. The word left her lips, but it did not carry. It dissolved into the stillness before it could reach even the nearest tree. The silence pressed in around her. Not empty. Complete. Shizuka closed her eyes and steadied her breathing. For years, she had been taught to quiet her thoughts before prayer. Instead of reaching for answers, she let her awareness settle the way she always had during the first moments before dawn services. Slowly, she became aware of something she had overlooked. The clearing was full. Not with people, with presence. Every tree seemed quietly aware of her. The moss beneath her feet carried the same gentle awareness, as though every living thing surrounding her had paused to watch what she would do next. The sensation should have unsettled her. Instead, it felt strangely familiar. She had experienced something similar once before, the harvest ceremony, when every kami within miles of the Yoshida shrine had answered her prayers. Only now she understood what had happened that day. They hadn't come because of the ceremony. They had come because of her. The realization settled over her slowly. For years, she had believed the white mark on her forehead was little more than an unusual birthmark, something the shrine tolerated rather than celebrated. Every lesson she had received taught her to become smaller, quieter, less noticeable. She smiled to herself. None of it had changed what she was. It had only delayed her understanding. A warm breeze stirred across the clearing. It carried the scent of cedar and clean water, along with something older that she couldn't quite name. The fragrance reminded her of incense after morning prayers, when the smoke had almost faded, but the room still held its memory. Without thinking, she rested her hand against the nearest tree. The cedar answered, not with words, with recognition. A gentle warmth spread beneath her palm before moving into her fingertips and up her arm, like greeting an old friend she somehow recognized despite never having met. Shizuka laughed quietly. So? Her voice sounded normal again. You've been here all along. The warmth beneath her hand deepened. She didn't know whether the forest understood her words. She was beginning to think it understood something much more important. It knew who she was. For the first time in her life, she realized she wasn't introducing herself to this place. She was being welcomed back. Shizuka left her hand against the cedar for several moments before letting it fall away. The warmth lingered in her fingertips. Curious, she reached toward another tree. This one felt different. The recognition was still there, but it carried another impression beneath it, subtle enough that she almost dismissed it as imagination. It reminded her of meeting two sisters who looked alike, but possessed entirely different personalities. She smiled. So each of you is different. A breeze stirred the branches overhead. This time she heard it. The sound wasn't carried through the air the way ordinary wind was. It settled gently into her thoughts, as though the forest had decided she no longer needed her ears to understand it. She turned slowly, studying the clearing with renewed curiosity. When she had first arrived, she had seen only trees. Now she noticed details she would have sworn weren't there before. Tiny white flowers pushed through the moss between ancient roots despite the cold. Small streams of clear water wound silently through the clearing before disappearing beneath the earth again. Foxfire drifted lazily between the trunks, moving without urgency. She watched one curious flame circle a nearby branch before floating toward her. It stopped inches from her face. The pale gold light hovered there as though examining her. Shizuka couldn't help herself. She reached out. The foxfire settled into her open palm. It wasn't hot. It wasn't even warm. Instead, it felt strangely familiar, like holding sunlight reflected on water. The little flame brightened. Then, with the enthusiasm of a curious bird, it drifted up to circle her shoulders before darting away into the trees. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. You've never done that before. Another light appeared, then another. Within moments, half a dozen foxfires had gathered around her, weaving lazy circles through the clearing as though word had spread that someone new had finally arrived. Shizuka turned slowly, watching them dance. So this is why he likes watching them. The thought made her smile. She had spent months trying to see foxfire through Kagan's eyes. Only now did she understand what he must have seen every evening beneath the trees. One particularly bold flame settled on her shoulder. Its light reflected softly against her cheek before it drifted upward again, disappearing into the branches overhead. She followed it with her eyes. The canopy seemed impossibly high. Sunlight filtered through the cedar boughs in long golden ribbons, filling the clearing with shifting patterns that changed every time the wind moved. The entire forest felt alive, not merely living, aware. She suddenly remembered the old shrine records describing sacred groves as places where the kami walked freely. For years, she had believed those passages were symbolic. Standing here, she wondered whether generations of priests had simply lacked the words to describe what they had seen. Perhaps this was what they had meant all along. She wandered deeper into the clearing, no longer searching for answers. She simply wanted to see what came next. Every step revealed something she hadn't noticed before. A cluster of mushrooms glowing faintly beneath a fallen log, butterflies that seemed almost transparent as they drifted between shafts of winter sunlight, tiny spirits, no larger than dragonflies, peeking curiously from behind broad green leaves before vanishing whenever she looked directly at them. She felt less like someone discovering a hidden place. She felt like someone who had finally been invited inside. Outside the clearing, Kagan waited. He had chosen the base of an old cedar overlooking the narrow trail leading back toward the shrine. From there, he could watch the edge of the clearing without crossing into it. He had no intention of disturbing whatever was happening inside. The stories had never mentioned whether anyone else had tried. After centuries of searching, he wasn't about to make the mistake of assuming curiosity gave him permission. He settled against the trunk and closed his eyes. The forest had always spoken to him, not with words, but with countless small changes that most beings would never notice. A squirrel abandoning its usual route through the branches, deer avoiding a particular ravine, the subtle shift in foxfire whenever another spirit entered his territory. For most of his life, those changes had formed a language only he understood. Today, they felt different. The forest's attention had turned inward. Everything living within the eastern grove seemed aware that something long expected had finally begun. He opened his eyes. The clearing remained unchanged. No light escaped between the trees. No surge of spiritual power rolled through the forest. If he hadn't witnessed Shizuka disappear with his own eyes, he would have believed she was still standing only a few steps away. He found himself smiling. "I suppose," he murmured, "some mysteries deserve to remain mysteries." The words had barely left his lips when the wind shifted. The smile disappeared. A raven lifted from the western trees. Another followed. Then another. None of them flew east. Every bird turned away from the same stretch of forest. Kagan rose immediately. He didn't need to investigate. He already knew. The clan had entered his territory. He extended his awareness across the forest, allowing it to spread through roots, streams, and ancient paths that had belonged to him for centuries. Almost immediately, he found them. 7. No attempt to conceal themselves this time. They were moving steadily through the western valleys, no longer concerned with avoiding notice. Their confidence told him everything he needed to know. Sato believed time had run out. Kagan glanced back toward the clearing. For a long moment, he simply stood there. He could still remember Shizuka's expression when she stepped into the grove. Curious, hopeful. For the first time since arriving at the abandoned shrine, she hadn't looked burdened by questions. She had looked happy. The thought settled quietly inside him. He would give her every remaining moment he could, even if it meant facing 7 fox spirits alone. He turned toward the western forest. As he walked, the foxfire drifting through the trees began to follow. One by one, small golden lights emerged from hollow trunks, fallen logs, and branches high overhead. They gathered around him until they formed a slow-moving procession, weaving silently through the cedars. It wasn't unusual to see foxfire in the forest. It was unusual to see them moving together. Kagan watched the lights gather around the trail ahead of him before lifting his gaze toward the western hills. "So, you've sensed them." The foxfire continued west, their quiet glow slipping through the trees as though answering the only way they could. Kagan rested his hand on the hilt of his sword. "Then stay clear of what's coming." His pace never quickened. There was no reason to hurry. The clan was coming to him. Better they found him far from the eastern grove than anywhere near Shizuka. He intended to keep it that way. Far behind him, hidden beyond the clearing where no battle could reach, Shizuka continued her quiet journey into a world that had waited centuries for her return. Ahead, the forest grew colder. Kagan recognized the feeling immediately. Someone else's foxfire had entered his land. He rested one hand on the hilt of the sword at his side. "Let's hope," he said softly to the empty forest. "I've bought her enough time." Then he continued west. The warmth beneath Shizuka's fingertips lingered long after she withdrew her hand from the cedar. She looked around the clearing again, trying to convince herself she was standing in the same place Kagan had led her to only moments before. The trees were unchanged. The moss still blanketed the stones. The winter sky still peeked through the cedar branches overhead. Yet everything felt closer. She couldn't explain it any better than that. When she looked at the nearest tree, she no longer saw only bark and branches. She noticed the way one root curved around a boulder instead of forcing its way beneath it. Moss climbed the northern side of the trunk, where the sunlight seldom reached, while tiny white flowers had somehow found enough warmth to bloom in the shelter of the roots, despite the season. She smiled to herself. How did I miss all of this? No answer came. None was needed. She had spent years looking at forests. Only now was she beginning to see one. A flicker of pale gold caught her eye. One of the foxfire drifted lazily between the trees before settling atop a weathered stone a few paces away. It bobbed gently, almost as if waiting. Shizuka approached slowly. "I suppose you're not here by accident." The little flame lifted from the stone and floated deeper into the clearing. She followed. Not because she believed it was leading her, because she found herself wanting to know where it was going. The path wound between ancient cedars until the trees opened around a spring no larger than a village well. Crystal clear water bubbled silently from beneath a bed of smooth stones before disappearing beneath the roots of the surrounding forest. She knelt beside it. The surface reflected her face. For an instant, she saw herself exactly as she expected. Dark eyes, loose strands of hair escaping the ribbon at the back of her head, the white mark hidden beneath her bangs. Then the reflection shifted. Another woman looked back at her, older. Her robes belonged to another century, their style unlike any Shizuka had seen in temple records. The same white mark rested openly upon her forehead, untouched by hair or cloth. The woman smiled. Not at Shizuka. At someone standing just beyond the edge of the water. The image rippled and disappeared. Shizuka stared into the spring. She didn't feel frightened. She wasn't even certain she had seen a vision. It felt more like catching a glimpse of someone through an open doorway before they continued on their way. My ancestors. The words barely rose above a whisper. She reached toward the water. The instant her fingers broke the surface, a gentle warmth spread through the spring, and tiny rings traveled outward until they reached every edge of the pool. The foxfire hovering nearby brightened. One after another, more lights emerged from the trees. They gathered above the spring in complete silence, their reflections dancing across the water like scattered stars. Shizuka watched them with quiet wonder. The foxfires, she realized, was a spiritual representation of Kagan because she wanted him here, but he couldn't be, so the forest catered to her comfort and created the closest thing. It wasn't Kagan. It was really the forest leading her. Kagan had explained the foxfire was part of him, but not. They worked independently, but also with his will. She finally understood. So you've been watching all of us. The thought came unbidden. Not watching her. Watching every woman who had stood here before. She found that strangely comforting. For the first time since leaving the Yoshida Shrine, she no longer felt as though she were walking a path no one else had ever traveled. Others had stood here. Others had asked the same questions. Others had wondered what waited beyond the life they thought they understood. A cool breeze stirred the branches overhead. This time she recognized something within it. Not words. An invitation. She rose slowly, her gaze following the foxfire as they drifted farther into the eastern grove. Somewhere ahead, another piece of the forest was waiting to be discovered. And for the first time in her life, there was no one telling her she shouldn't ask what lay beyond the next tree. Shizuka closed her eyes, letting the quiet of the eastern grove settle around her. For the first time in her life, the forest no longer felt like a place outside herself. She felt the ancient cedars reaching deep into the earth. She felt water moving beneath the roots. She felt foxfire drifting through the trees like slow-moving stars. Then, something disturbed the stillness. The sensation was faint, far away, like a pebble dropped into the surface of a perfectly calm pond. She opened her eyes. The foxfire had stopped moving. Every golden light hung motionless in the air. The silence that had once felt welcoming now carried a quiet tension. Shizuka turned toward the west. She couldn't explain how she knew the direction. She simply knew. Something had entered the forest. Something that didn't belong. The western forest was quieter than it should have been. Kagan followed the narrow trail without hurrying. The clan knew these woods well enough to understand they couldn't outrun him. If they intended to cross into the eastern territory, they would do it carefully. The silence confirmed they already had. He stopped beside a shallow stream that wound between the cedars. Only yesterday, foxes had come here to drink before sunrise. Songbirds usually gathered in the branches overhead, filling the forest with the ordinary sounds of another winter morning. Today, the stream ran undisturbed. The branches stood empty. Even the wind seemed reluctant to linger. Kagan crouched beside the water. The current carried more than melted snow. He dipped 2 fingers into the stream. The cold water flowed around his hand for only a moment before tiny ribbons of warmth drifted past his skin. Foreign spirit energy. Not strong enough for a human to notice, not nearly subtle enough to escape him. He withdrew his hand and watched the current continue downstream. They're spreading out. It was exactly what he would have done. One group would draw his attention, another would circle east, a third would wait for the first mistake. Kagan rose. For the first time that morning, he allowed his full awareness to spread through the western forest. Roots, stone, hidden streams, every familiar trail. The forest answered immediately. 7. No longer traveling together. They had divided themselves across the valleys, moving with enough distance between them that no ordinary guardian could intercept them all. A faint smile crossed Kagan's face. You're learning. There was no pride in the words, only acknowledgement. Sato had spent years studying him. Apparently, he had been paying attention. Kagan rested one hand on the hilt of his sword. So have I. Kagan remained where he stood, listening. The forest had become very good at keeping secrets over the centuries. It whispered through shifting branches, the course of hidden streams, and the countless creatures that called it home. Most who entered these woods heard only the wind. Kagan heard the difference. A cedar branch creaked somewhere to the north. Too much weight. A fox broke from the underbrush farther west, running harder than any fox would without reason. Then came the silence. It spread through the forest in quiet waves. Birdsong faded. Insects disappeared into the fallen leaves. Even the stream at his feet seemed suddenly louder, no longer hidden beneath the ordinary sounds of the woods. He closed his eyes. 7. But no longer where they had been. They were moving. One approached from the north. 2 more angled through the western ridge. The remaining 4 had disappeared completely. A lesser spirit might have mistaken that for concealment. Kagan recognized it for what it was. Discipline. Sato hadn't sent 7 warriors to overwhelm him. He had sent 7 hunters with one instruction: separate the guardian from the shrine. Kagan opened his eyes and looked east. He couldn't see the clearing from here. The ancient cedars stood between them, their trunks forming a living wall that had protected the eastern grove long before humans gave it a name. He allowed himself one quiet thought: stay where you are. Whether he meant the words for Shizuka or himself, he couldn't have said. Then, a twig snapped behind him. Ordinary. Almost careless. Too careless. Kagan didn't turn. If Sato hoped to surprise me, he said calmly, he should have came himself. A quiet laugh drifted through the trees. In the time we've observed you, you always did enjoy ruining an entrance. The voice carried no anger, only confidence. Kagan finally turned. A figure stepped from between the cedars. He wore dark robes trimmed in deep crimson, untouched by briars despite the miles of forest behind him. A single foxtail swayed lazily behind him, its ember-colored tip glowing like a coal in fading firelight. He smiled with easy familiarity. "It's nice to see you again." Kagan's expression didn't change. I couldn't say the same. The smile remained. I was hoping we'd have the chance to speak before the others became enthusiastic. You've already crossed into my territory. Your territory? The newcomer glanced around the forest with quiet amusement. Must everything belong to someone? It belongs to those who protect it. And yet, the fox spirit said softly, here we are. Neither of them moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Far to the east, beyond hills neither of them could see, a faint pulse of white light rose above the treetops before disappearing again. The newcomer noticed it. So, his smile widened ever so slightly. It really was her. Kagan's hand settled around the hilt of his sword. You've seen enough. I don't believe I have. The fox spirit's eyes lifted to meet his. I've only just arrived. And somewhere deeper in the western forest, another branch snapped. Kagan's eyes never left the fox spirit before him. The second sound came from farther to his left, then another behind him. The newcomer smiled. You still count them. I always did, and you always knew where to look. Kagan's fingers remained loosely around the hilt of his sword. I also know when I'm being distracted. The smile lingered, though something behind it shifted. You think this is a distraction? I know Sato better than he realizes. The fox spirit chuckled softly. Do you? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The forest settled into an uneasy silence, as though every living thing had paused to hear what would happen next. I came because Sato asked me to, the fox spirit said at last. Nothing more. I don't believe you. I didn't expect you to. He took another slow step forward, stopping well outside the reach of Kagan's blade. You've become suspicious in your old age. I've become accurate. The fox spirit laughed. I've missed that. Kagan didn't return the smile. What does Sato want? You already know. I'd rather hear you say it. The fox spirit lowered his eyes for a moment before looking back toward the eastern forest. The woman. The words settled heavily between them. And if I refuse? You already have. A cold breeze stirred the cedars. The fox spirit sighed. I told him this would be the outcome. And yet he sent you. He did. Why? The fox spirit looked at him for a long moment. Because once, a faint smile returned to his face. you would have considered being friends. Kagan's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. That was a very long time ago. It was. The fox spirit nodded slowly. I wish things had remained that simple. Another branch snapped. This one was much closer. The fox spirit closed his eyes briefly. They've grown impatient. I expected they would. You still have time to leave. No. I was afraid you'd say that. The fox spirit stepped backward into the shadows between the cedars. I truly am sorry. His form dissolved into drifting embers before the last spark disappeared. The first blade came out of the trees. It wasn't aimed at Kagan. It flew past him, straight toward the eastern forest. Kagan moved before the weapon had crossed half the distance. Steel flashed. The blade shattered into fragments that scattered harmlessly across the snow. The forest exploded into motion. Foxfire burst from the trees. 7 figures emerged from the shadows, and the battle finally began. The 7 fox spirits spread through the trees with practiced precision. None of them rushed him. They didn't need to. Each one moved to a different position, forcing Kagan to turn with them as they slowly closed the circle. Snow drifted quietly between the cedars. For a brief moment, the forest looked almost peaceful. Then the first spirit moved. He came low, gliding over the snow with a curved blade drawn across his body. Kagan met him without hesitation. Steel rang through the forest. The clash lasted only a heartbeat. The younger spirit staggered backward, surprise flashing across his face before he regained his footing. Kagan never pursued him. Another attack came from behind. He pivoted, catching a second blade before it reached his shoulder. A third struck from his left, then a fourth. The attacks flowed one into another, never allowing him a moment to stand still. It wasn't chaos, it was practice. They had trained for this. Kagan's sword moved with quiet efficiency. Every strike was measured. Every step carried purpose. He gave away nothing. One yokai lunged too far. Kagan twisted beneath the attack and struck the flat of his blade across the fox yokai's wrist. The weapon flew into the snow. Before the spirit could recover, Kagan drove a shoulder into his chest, sending him tumbling backward through the underbrush. He didn't wait to see where the Kitsune landed. Another blade was already descending. Kagan caught it above his head. For the first time, he felt the weight behind the strike. Not strength, determination. These weren't reckless young warriors hoping to prove themselves. They had accepted they might never leave this forest. If that was the price of reaching the Eastern Grove, they were willing to pay it. The realization settled heavily in Kagan's mind. Sato hadn't only sent hunters, he sent believers. A sharp whistle echoed through the trees. Every fox spirit broke away at once. The forest fell silent. Kagan lowered his sword only slightly. He knew better than to mistake silence for victory. They suddenly climbed into the cedars without making a sound. Then they moved, but not towards him. Past him. Straight toward the eastern forest. Kagan's eyes widened. So that's your move? No! Foxfire erupted in front of him as all 7 tails burst into brilliant gold. The snow beneath his feet shimmered. Before the nearest yokai reached the ground, Kagan was already moving, launching himself after them. The nearest yokai landed lightly on the snow, only to find Kagan already there. Their blades met with a sharp crack that echoed through the trees. The yokai's eyes widened. He had expected pursuit. He hadn't expected Kagan to close the distance that quickly. Kagan drove him backward with a single powerful strike before turning toward the next. Another yokai slipped past. Kagan swept his free hand toward the ground. The snow answered. A wave of frozen earth burst upward between the cedars, forcing 2 more yokai to leap aside instead of continuing east. It bought him only seconds, but seconds were enough. He was among them again. The forest erupted with movement. Steel flashed between the trees. Foxfire scattered through the branches. Every path toward the eastern grove became a battlefield. One yokai broke through. Kagan saw him from the corner of his eye. Without thinking, he threw his sword. The blade spun through the air. It struck the fleeing yokai across the shoulder, sending him crashing into the snow before he had taken another step. Kagan reached out. The sword answered. It tore free from the snow and flew back into his waiting hand as though it had never left it. The 7 paused, only for a heartbeat, long enough to understand something. There would be no slipping past him, not while he was standing. The oldest among them lowered his blade slightly. So the stories were true. Kagan's breathing remained steady. I told Sato. No one moved. Snow drifted between them. The silence lasted only a moment. Then, from somewhere deep in the western forest, a single howl split the air. Every fox spirit looked toward the sound. Kagan did not. He already knew the howl wasn't meant for them. It was meant for him. Sato had arrived. None of the fox spirits moved. The howl faded into the distance, leaving only the whisper of falling snow. The youngest among them glanced toward the western ridge. What was that? The oldest never took his eyes off Kagan. You know exactly what it was. Kagan stood quietly in the center of the clearing. His sword rested at his side. He wasn't threatening them. He didn't need to. The fox spirit Kagan had struck moments earlier slowly climbed to his feet, brushing snow from his sleeve. His shoulder ached where the blade had caught him. I thought the stories exaggerated. The oldest gave a quiet shake of his head. So did I. Another spirit shifted uneasily, his grip tightening around his weapon. He's only one guardian. No, the oldest replied. He's the guardian. Silence settled over the clearing. For the first time since entering the forest, doubt found its way into their ranks. They had trained. They had prepared. They had studied every report Sato had gathered over the years. None of it had prepared them for standing in front of Kagan. Kagan watched them calmly. He wasn't enjoying this. Most of them were too young to remember the forest before Sato. They believed they were protecting their own future. That belief made them dangerous. It also made them easy to lead. A slow breeze drifted through the cedars. It carried a familiar scent. Kagan closed his eyes for only a moment. When he opened them again, he looked toward the western ridge. So, he said quietly, you finally came yourself. The fox spirit stepped aside without a word. Not out of fear, out of respect. A lone figure walked down the slope between the cedars. He wasn't hurried. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. His hands rested comfortably behind his back as though he had simply come to continue a conversation interrupted years ago. He stopped several yards away. You knew I'd come. Kagan nodded once. I knew you'd stop sending others eventually. A faint smile crossed Sato's face. I had hoped we could avoid this. No. Kagan's answer came without hesitation. You hoped I'd surrender. The smile remained. I hoped you'd listen. I already did. Kagan's voice stayed calm. 400 years ago. For the first time. Sato's smile faltered, only slightly. Only for a heartbeat. Then it returned. I'm not the same yokai I was then. No. Kagan looked at him with something almost like regret. That's exactly the problem. The forest grew still. Neither of them reached for a weapon. The younger fox spirits looked from one to the other, waiting. They had expected anger. Instead, they were watching two old acquaintances realize there was nothing left to say. Sato let out a slow breath. I was hoping we could settle this without more bloodshed. Kagan tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. You crossed into my forest. I did. You threatened someone under my protection. I did. You lied. For the first time, Sato said nothing. Kagan drew his sword. The sound of steel leaving its sheath echoed through the silent forest. Then we're finished talking. Kagan looked down at the sword in his hand. For a long moment, neither he nor Sato moved. Then, without a word, Kagan lowered the blade. Its point settled gently into the snow. Across the clearing, Sato smiled. I wondered if you'd remember. I never forgot. Sato reached to his own sword. Instead of drawing it, he removed the belt that held it and let the weapon fall beside him. Neither of them had come here to test steel. They had come to settle something far older. The younger fox spirits exchanged uncertain glances. None of them had ever seen an elder fight. Kagan stepped forward. The foxfire gathered around him almost immediately. One by one, golden lights drifted from the trees, circling slowly around his body until they formed a quiet current of living light. Across the clearing, crimson foxfire answered. It flowed around Sato like smoke rising from hidden embers, slower than Kagan's, but restless. Always moving, always searching for an opening. The forest reacted. The ancient cedars bent gently away from the space between them. Snow lifted from the ground in tiny spirals. Even the air seemed reluctant to remain where the two currents met. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then Kagan raised one hand. The golden foxfire rushed forward, not as flames, as 7 luminous foxes, each no larger than a wolf, their bodies woven from living spirit light. They raced silently across the clearing. Sato answered with a sweep of his sleeve. Crimson foxfire burst outward, meeting them head-on. The collision shook the forest. No explosion followed. Instead, the two currents twisted around one another like opposing rivers, each struggling to consume the other without ever losing its own shape. The younger spirits stepped back instinctively. They weren't watching a battle. They were watching two ancient yokai reveal what they truly were. Shizuka remained facing the western forest. The uneasy feeling lingered. She couldn't explain why. Nothing around her had changed. The spring still bubbled quietly beside her. The ancient cedars still stretched toward the winter sky. The foxfire still hovered silently among the branches. Yet the peaceful rhythm she had begun to feel was no longer complete. It was as though a single note in a beautiful song had fallen out of harmony. She closed her eyes. The feeling returned almost immediately. The forest answered with a roar of foxfire. Golden light surged around Kagan, flowing through the cedars like a living current. Across the clearing, crimson foxfire gathered around Sato. For a single heartbeat. Neither moved. Then they vanished. The younger Kitsune barely had time to follow the movement. A sharp crack echoed through the valley as two currents of foxfire collided high above the snow. Golden light scattered through the branches. Crimson sparks spiraled toward the frozen ground. The clash lasted only an instant before both spirits separated. Kagan landed lightly upon the snow. Sato slid backward several feet before finding his footing. A faint smile crossed Kagan's face. "You're faster than you were." Sato brushed a sleeve free of snow. "And you're still holding back." "I don't need to prove anything." Without warning, Sato rushed forward again. This time, the crimson foxfire didn't strike head-on. It split apart, circling Kagan from opposite sides before converging again. Kagan raised one hand. The golden foxfire answered immediately. The two currents met with a flash of light that rippled through the trees. Snow fell from the branches in shimmering curtains. The younger Kitsune shielded their eyes. When the light faded, Kagan was exactly where he had been. Sato was not. He stood farther back than before, breathing a little harder. His smile had disappeared. The oldest of the younger Kitsune lowered his gaze. "He can't break through." "No," another answered quietly. "He can't." Sato heard them. His expression hardened. Once more he charged. Once more Kagan met him. Again the forest shook as golden and crimson foxfire collided. This time the sound rolled through the valley like distant thunder. When it ended, Sato stumbled. Only one step. But it was enough. Kagan looked at him quietly. "It doesn't have to end this way." For just a moment, Sato said nothing. The younger Kitsune watched in silence. They had expected a battle. Instead, they were watching their leader lose. Sato slowly lifted his eyes. There was frustration in them now. Not fear. Frustration. His plan had been carefully laid. His warriors had done exactly as they were instructed. Everything had unfolded as he had expected. Everything. Except Kagan. For the first time that day, Sato realized he was running out of time. For a long moment, neither spirit moved. Snow drifted lazily between them. Sato looked past Kagan, beyond the ancient cedars, beyond the ridge, toward the eastern forest. "You've already lost." Kagan didn't turn. "No, you simply haven't realized it yet." A faint smile touched Sato's face. "While we've been standing here," he let the words hang in the cold air. "She's changing." Kagan's expression remained calm. "You'll never reach her." "I don't have to." Sato folded his hands behind his back, as though the duel had become little more than a conversation. "I only need time." Kagan understood. That had always been Sato's true objective. Keep him occupied. Delay him. Long enough for opportunity to present itself. "You've underestimated her." "No." Sato shook his head. "I've underestimated you." For the first time since the duel began, Sato glanced toward the younger Kitsune waiting among the trees. No words were spoken. None were needed. The eldest among them stiffened. His eyes widened slightly. He understood the look. So did the others. Kagan saw it. "Sato." His voice was quiet. "Don't." For the briefest moment, Sato hesitated. Centuries of tradition rested on a single choice. A duel between elder yokai had always been sacred, one against one. No exceptions. Slowly, Sato looked back at Kagan. "I'm sorry." He wasn't apologizing. He was deciding. His hand lifted, only an inch. It was enough. The younger Kitsune moved, all at once. Golden foxfire erupted around him, surging through the snow like a living storm. The first Kitsune never reached the trees. The second was thrown backward before his feet touched the ground. The third changed direction in mid-stride, but there were too many. For the first time since the battle had begun, Kagan was forced to choose: protect the forest or stop Sato. That single moment of hesitation was all Sato needed. Crimson foxfire struck from behind. It tore across Kagan's side before he could turn. The force sent him crashing through the snow. The forest cried out. Shizuka staggered. The peaceful stillness surrounding the spring vanished in an instant. Every foxfire scattered. The water rippled violently, though no wind touched its surface. She caught herself against the smooth stone at the edge of the spring, her heart pounding. The feeling returned, stronger. So strong it stole her breath. The forest wasn't simply disturbed anymore. It was hurting. She pressed both hands against the stone, trying to steady herself. "What happened?" The words trembled as they left her lips. No answer came. Instead, the ancient cedars groaned softly, not from the wind, from something deeper. The sensation spread beneath her feet, through the roots, through the earth, through every living thing surrounding her. Shizuka closed her eyes. For one impossible moment, she could feel the forest reaching toward something beyond the eastern grove. Not with fear, with desperation. Her breathing became uneven. The warmth she had felt since entering the door returned all at once. Only now it surged through her instead of resting quietly within her. She gasped. The foxfire reappeared. Dozens, then hundreds. They emerged from every corner of the grove, surrounding the spring until the entire clearing shimmered with soft golden light. None of them stopped. Every one of them moved toward Shizuka. They circled her slowly, then faster. The air around her glowed. She instinctively raised an arm to shield her eyes. The warmth became almost unbearable. Not painful, overwhelming. She felt the strength of ancient trees, the endless patience of stone, the quiet persistence of flowing water, the memories of countless seasons. They poured through her faster than she could understand. Her knees gave way. She caught herself before falling completely. "I can't." The words came out as little more than a whisper. The foxfire continued circling. The forest wasn't forcing her. It was asking more of her than her body was ready to give. Another wave swept through the grove, this one sharper than the last. Shizuka cried out. The warmth vanished. Every foxfire froze where it hovered. Then, as one, they turned toward the western forest. Shizuka looked up. Tears blurred her vision. She didn't know what had happened. She didn't know why the awakening had stopped. She knew only one thing. Someone beyond the trees needed her. The path behind her stood open, not stronger, clearer. It moved through the forest like ripples spreading across still water. Something had crossed into this sacred place, something the forest did not welcome. Her eyes opened. The forest looked the same, but it no longer felt unfamiliar. She took a slow step forward. The foxfire moved with her, simply keeping pace. The warmth she had first felt within the spring spread quietly through her once more. This time it reached farther. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breathing became effortless. For a brief moment, she could no longer tell where she ended and where the forest began. Then, the feeling shattered. Shizuka gasped. The warmth vanished as quickly as it had come. The foxfire scattered in every direction. Birds burst from the western trees. A wave of unease swept through the grove so suddenly that she instinctively took a step backward. She pressed a hand against her chest. What happened? No answer came, only silence. But this time, the silence was afraid. Shizuka remained on one knee, struggling to steady her breathing. The warmth that had filled the grove only moments before had faded into a quiet ache deep within her chest. Around her, the foxfire no longer circled. They waited. Every golden light faced the western forest, the same direction she had felt the disturbance. She slowly lifted her head. What is it? For the first time since entering the grove, the foxfire moved, not away from her, toward the path she had taken to reach the spring. One after another, they drifted through the cedars, pausing only long enough to be certain she was following. Shizuka pushed herself to her feet. Her legs felt strangely heavy, as though the forest had asked more of her than she yet understood. She took one hesitant step. The foxfire continued ahead. Another step. The warmth beneath her feet returned, guiding her over roots and stones she no longer needed to watch for. The forest seemed to know exactly where she needed to go. The spring disappeared behind her. The ancient cedars gave way one by one until the familiar clearing came into view. Shizuka stopped. The door stood before her. It looked exactly as it had when she entered. Simple, silent, ancient. She stared at it. I haven't finished. A gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead. The foxfire gathered around the doorway, their soft light filling the clearing. None of them crossed its threshold. They simply waited. Shizuka lowered her eyes. I'll come back. The words escaped before she realized she had spoken them. The breeze passed gently across her face, acknowledging her promise. She stepped toward the door. The moment she crossed its threshold, the sounds of the ordinary forest returned all at once. The wind, the distant stream, the creaking of cedar branches. Then, another sound. A loud crackling, as if a storm was coming. It rang through the trees somewhere beyond the western ridge. Shizuka froze. She knew that sound. Her eyes lifted toward the west. Without another thought, she ran. Kagan hit the frozen ground hard. The impact sent a wave of foxfire rolling across the snow before it dissolved into the winter air. He pushed himself up on one knee, one hand pressed against the wound at his side. Warm crimson stained the white snow beneath him. Across the clearing, Sato remained where he was. The younger Kitsune had stopped moving. Even they understood what had just happened. One of them lowered his head. We broke the duel. No one answered him. Kagan slowly rose to his feet. His breathing had become heavier, but his eyes never left Sato. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Snow drifted between them. The forest had fallen silent. Sato's gaze lingered on the blood soaking into the ground. I didn't want it to happen this way. Kagan's voice was calm, despite the pain. You gave the order. Sato didn't deny it. I gave the order. The words hung heavily in the cold air. The younger Kitsune shifted uneasily. Some looked toward Sato. Others couldn't bring themselves to look at Kagan. Centuries of tradition had been broken. There would be no pretending otherwise. Kagan straightened. The foxfire surrounding him had grown quieter, but it had not disappeared. It gathered once more around his shoulders, rising and falling with each breath. You've wanted this forest for 400 years. His voice carried through the clearing. And today, he looked directly at Sato. You traded your honor for it. Sato lowered his eyes for only a moment. Then he looked back at Kagan. Honor won't build the future. No. Kagan's expression never changed, but it decides what kind of future survives. For the first time, Sato had no answer. The silence stretched between them. Then one of the younger Kitsune stepped forward. He removed the sash from around his waist and laid it on the snow. Without a word, he bowed to Kagan. Another followed, then another. One by one, the younger Kitsune lowered their heads. Not in surrender, in apology. They had obeyed their leader, but they knew what they had taken part in. Sato watched them in silence. His jaw tightened. The moment had slipped beyond his control. He had wounded Kagan, yet somehow, he had lost something far greater. Sato's eyes swept across the clearing. One by one, the younger Kitsune remained where they had bowed. None of them moved, none of them celebrated. Their silence weighed heavier than any wound. Slowly, Sato's expression hardened. "You bow." His voice was quiet. "To him?" No one answered. The eldest among them finally lifted his head. He fought with honor. His eyes lowered again. "We did not." The words struck harder than any blow Kagan had landed. Sato looked from one face to the next. He had led them, trained them, promised them a future. Yet in the moment that mattered most, they had bowed to the guardian he had sworn to defeat. Something inside him snapped. His crimson foxfire surged violently around him, scattering snow in every direction. Kagan steadied himself, one hand pressed against the wound in his side. He recognized the look immediately. Reason had left Sato's eyes. Only anger remained. "You still don't understand," Sato said through clenched teeth. "I am doing this for all of us." No one answered. The silence only fueled his anger. He raised his hand. Crimson foxfire gathered around his arm, growing brighter with every heartbeat. Kagan forced himself upright. His body protested the movement. Even wounded, he stepped forward. If Sato wanted the forest, he would have to come through him. Sato's foxfire ignited. The clearing blazed crimson. Kagan tried to move. His wounded body answered too slowly. Then, a blur of white rushed between them. Shizuka. She threw herself in front of Kagan and lifted both hands. She didn't think. She only knew one thing. He couldn't die. The warmth she had carried from the eastern grove answered her. Golden light burst upward from the forest floor, sweeping around her in a radiant arc before closing around both her and Kagan. The crimson foxfire struck. The collision exploded across the clearing. The force bent the ancient cedars. Snow cascaded from every branch. A wave of light rolled through the forest, scattering foxfire in every direction. For one suspended moment, the golden barrier held. Then the crimson foxfire shattered. Its light broke apart into countless crimson embers that drifted harmlessly into the winter sky before disappearing. Silence followed. The golden light surrounding Shizuka slowly faded. It dissolved into hundreds of tiny foxfire that drifted back toward the eastern forest as though returning home. Shizuka remained where she stood. Her hands were still raised. Her breathing had become ragged. She stared ahead, unable to understand what had just happened. She hadn't called upon the forest. She hadn't asked anything of it. She had simply refused to let Kagan die. Sato never took his eyes off her. The anger that had consumed him only moments before quietly disappeared. In its place, a slow smile crossed his face. After 400 years, he had finally seen the proof with his own eyes. The forest had answered her. Silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then Sato moved. Crimson foxfire exploded around him as he crossed the clearing with impossible speed. Shizuka barely had time to turn. Golden light answered before fear could. The crimson foxfire crashed against it, erupting into a shower of sparks that scattered across the snow. Sato was already moving again. He struck from her right, then above, then behind. Every attack came faster than the last. Shizuka didn't understand how she was keeping up. She wasn't thinking. Her body simply moved. Each step felt guided by something older than herself. She turned. Golden light followed the movement of her sleeve, sweeping Sato's attack harmlessly aside. She spun as another strike came. The light flowed with her, weaving through the air like sunlight dancing across moving water. The clearing became a storm of crimson and gold. The younger Kitsune watched in stunned silence. None of them had ever seen anything like it. Behind her, Kagan forced himself to stand. Pain exploded through his side. He took one step, then another. His legs buckled. He caught himself against the frozen ground before forcing himself up again. Every instinct screamed at him to reach her. Every attempt ended the same way. Still, he refused to stop trying. Across the clearing, Sato attacked again. His movements became sharper, more desperate. Each strike carried more foxfire than the last. Shizuka continued to meet every attack, not with strength, with instinct. The forest seemed to move with her. The wind shifted around her. Foxfire circled her. Ancient cedars groaned softly as though waking from a long sleep. Sato stopped, only for an instant. His eyes searched Shizuka's face. No, not her face. Beyond it, The golden light surrounding her no longer resembled foxfire. It spread through the forest itself. The branches swayed, though no wind touched them. The earth trembled beneath his feet. Every foxfire in the clearing turned toward Shizuka at once. The forest had chosen. Sato's jaw tightened. No. The whisper escaped him before he realized he had spoken. This cannot be. His crimson foxfire erupted one final time, greater than before. Brighter than before. Everything he possessed gathered into a single attack. The clearing vanished beneath crimson light. Kagan tried to reach her. His wounded body refused. He could only watch. Shizuka stood alone. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't speak. She simply stepped forward. The moment her foot touched the snow, the forest answered. Every foxfire burst into brilliant gold. The ancient cedars bowed. The wind roared through the clearing. The earth trembled beneath them. Golden light rose from the forest floor, flowing around Shizuka like a great river before rushing toward the crimson foxfire. The two forces met. The world disappeared in light. For one endless moment. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing existed except gold and crimson. Then, the crimson foxfire broke. It shattered into thousands of fading embers that dissolved into the winter sky. Silence returned. Sato remained frozen where he stood. His breathing had become shallow. His eyes never left Shizuka. But he was no longer looking at the young Miko who had entered the forest. He saw something far older moving through her, something no Kitsune had ever possessed, something no clan could ever command. The spirit of the ancient forest, the blessing of the gods themselves. For the first time in 400 years, Sato felt fear. Not for his life, for his arrogance. He had believed the forest was something to conquer, something to possess. Instead, it had judged him. Slowly, he lowered his hand. The crimson foxfire disappeared. Without another word, he stepped backward. The younger Kitsune followed. None questioned him. None looked away from Shizuka. One by one, they vanished into the western forest. Only when the last trace of crimson disappeared among the trees did the golden light begin to leave her. The foxfire drifted quietly back toward the eastern grove. The wind settled. The cedars grew still. The warmth flowing through Shizuka faded with them. Suddenly, she felt everything. The exhaustion, the pain, the weight of what her body had carried. Her knees gave way. Before she touched the snow, Kagan caught her. He gathered her gently into his arms as the last of the golden foxfire disappeared into the forest. For the first time since the battle had begun, the guardian allowed himself to breathe. Ancient cedars stood scarred where crimson foxfire had torn through their trunks. Kagan lowered his eyes to Shizuka. A few loose strands of dark hair rested across her face, stirred gently by the winter breeze. Carefully, almost hesitantly, he brushed them aside. She didn't stir. He let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You're safe." The words were barely more than a whisper, whether he was reassuring her or himself. Even he wasn't certain. Only then did he notice the warmth still lingering around her. It hadn't disappeared completely. Faint threads of golden light drifted from her hands before dissolving into the cold air. The forest wasn't leaving her. It was simply growing quiet again. Kagan looked toward the western forest. Nothing. No crimson foxfire, no movement. Sato had truly gone. Only now did he allow himself to think about his own wound. He shifted slightly, and a sharp pain spread across his side. He looked down. The crimson stain had grown larger. A quiet laugh escaped him. "So," his voice was tired, "it seems we both overdid it." Shizuka gave the slightest groan, her brow furrowed. Kagan immediately leaned closer. "Shizuka?" Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, her eyes opened only halfway. The world around her was little more than shifting shapes and soft winter light. The first thing she recognized was Kagan, not the guardian, not the ancient Kitsune. Simply the face leaning over her, filled with unmistakable concern. "You," she whispered weakly. "You stayed." Kagan couldn't help but smile. There was never another choice. She tried to sit up. The effort lasted only a second before dizziness overtook her. Kagan gently placed a hand behind her shoulders, steadying her before she could fall again. Easy. His voice remained calm. The forest carried more through you than any human body was ever meant to bear. Shizuka looked down at her trembling hands. I remember, she paused, searching through scattered memories. The light. The forest. Then her eyes widened. Kagan. Instinctively, she reached toward the wound at his side. Her fingers stopped just short of touching the blood that had soaked through his robes. This, her voice trembled. This is because of me. Kagan slowly shook his head. No. He met her eyes. This is because someone forgot that honor matters. For the first time since the battle ended, a gentle smile crossed Shizuka's face. It was small, almost exhausted. But you're alive. Kagan looked at her for a long moment. So are you. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. Above them, the foxfire drifted silently through the cedars. The ancient forest had returned to its quiet rhythm. For now, it was enough simply to be alive. Winter refused to loosen its grip for many weeks. Snow continued to blanket the mountains surrounding the shrine, covering the scars left behind by the battle until the forest appeared untouched once more. Nature had always known how to heal. Perhaps that was why Kagan understood healing better than most. His own wounds had closed long before Shizuka opened her eyes. The forest had seen to that. The deeper wounds, the ones carried in memory, would take longer. Every morning before sunrise, Kagan swept the stone paths leading to the shrine. Fresh snow, fallen cedar needles, broken branches left behind by winter winds. No matter what the season brought, the grounds were waiting for Shizuka when she finally woke. Inside the shrine, another battle quietly unfolded. Shizuka slept, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Her body had given everything it possessed to become the bridge between the forest and the world beyond it. Now it demanded rest. Kagan learned quickly that caring for an exhausted Miko required more patience than facing an army of Kitsune. When she drifted awake, he prepared warm broth over the small hearth before she could insist she wasn't hungry. When she tried to stand too soon, he quietly guided her back beneath the blankets, without a word. When nightmares found her in the darkness, he remained nearby until her breathing slowed once more. Neither of them spoke often about the battle. They didn't need to. The silence between them had become familiar, comfortable. Outside, winter slowly surrendered to spring. The first plum blossoms appeared beside the shrine, then wildflowers. Birdsong returned to the cedars. Shizuka finally finished her transition. She wanted to explain to Kagan what it was like, but there were no words. Kagan accepted that. The door was never for him. After all, how could he explain being a yokai? It simply was. All there was now was their love and their dedication to the forest and the shrine. Pilgrims once again found the narrow mountain path leading to the ancient grounds. Most came seeking blessings. Some came searching for answers. Few realized they were being watched by golden foxfire drifting quietly through the trees. Shizuka recovered little by little. The trembling in her hands disappeared. The exhaustion faded. Her laughter returned. The shrine, once quiet and forgotten, slowly filled with life. Years passed. Word spread farther than either of them had expected. Travelers spoke of a mountain shrine where prayers seemed to bring peace long before answers. Families returned year after year. Children who had once visited with their parents now climbed the mountain carrying children of their own. The abandoned shrine was abandoned no longer. Then one autumn morning, several figures appeared at the foot of the stone staircase. Their robes marked them as shrine maidens. Shizuka recognized them immediately. Tomoe. Behind her stood several of the very Miko who had once whispered behind Shizuka's back, who had questioned her, mocked her curiosity, dismissed her kindness as weakness. None of them wore the confidence she remembered. They climbed the long staircase slowly. When they reached the courtyard, Tomoe lowered herself into a respectful bow. The others followed. We've come. Her voice caught for only a moment. To ask permission. Shizuka looked from one familiar face to the next. No anger stirred within her, only surprise. Tomoe lifted her eyes. The shrine where we served has closed. She hesitated. We've heard what you've built here. Another long silence settled between them. Finally, Tomoe bowed once more. If you'll have us, We'd like to serve this shrine. The mountain breeze stirred the prayer ribbons hanging beneath the shrine's eaves. For several long moments, no one spoke. Shizuka looked at the familiar faces before her. Time had changed them. Pride had given way to uncertainty. The certainty they had once carried now rested quietly at their feet. Tomo remained bowed. If you'll have us, we'd like to serve this shrine. Shizuka's expression remained gentle. I can't. The words were quiet, but unmistakable. The Miko exchanged uneasy glances. Tomoe slowly lifted her head. There was disappointment in her eyes, but not surprise. I understand. Shizuka nodded. This shrine was built on trust. Her gaze drifted across the courtyard. The people who serve here protect one another. She looked back at Tomo. I don't believe we've reached that place. The words carried no anger, only honesty. Tomo lowered her eyes once more. We haven't. For the first time since arriving, a faint, saddened smile crossed her face. I hoped. She stopped herself and shook her head. No, you've earned the right to choose. She bowed deeply. I was not kind to you. I cannot ask kindness in return. Shizuka stepped forward. There is another shrine. Tomoe looked up. It's in the northern province. The head priest there has been searching for experienced shrine maidens. She reached inside her sleeve and withdrew a neatly folded letter. I wrote this several months ago, after hearing they needed help. She offered it to Tomo. I believe they would welcome you. Tomo accepted the letter with both hands. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. You would still help us? Shizuka smiled softly. I won't reopen an old door. Her eyes met Tomo's, but I won't close one that hasn't been opened yet. For the first time. Tomoe smiled. It was small, bittersweet, but genuine. Thank you. The shrine maidens bowed one final time before quietly making their way back down the mountain. Shizuka watched them until they disappeared among the cedars. Beside her, Kagan stepped into the courtyard. You knew they would come. She nodded. Eventually. And you knew what your answer would be. I did. Kagan looked toward the mountain path. They've changed. So have I. The breeze carried the scent of cedar between them. A year passed. The seasons turned quietly, each one leaving its own gifts upon the mountain. Spring covered the shrine in blossoms. Summer filled the forest with laughter as children chased drifting foxfire beneath the ancient cedars. Autumn painted the valley in crimson and gold. Winter wrapped the shrine in peaceful silence once more. On the first morning of spring, that silence was broken by the cry of a newborn child. Kagan stood just outside the shrine, frozen in place. He had faced armies without hesitation. He had stood against spirits older than kingdoms. None of those moments compared to the sound that reached him now. The door slid open. An elderly midwife smiled warmly. You may come in. For perhaps the first time in centuries. The ancient guardian looked genuinely nervous. He stepped inside. Shizuka looked up from the sleeping bundle in her arms. Though tired, her smile carried a happiness he had never seen before. She carefully lifted the child toward him. Kagan hesitated. He looked almost embarrassed. I've never held someone so small. Shizuka laughed softly. Neither have I. Together, they looked down at the tiny face sleeping peacefully between them. Outside, golden foxfire drifted quietly through the blossoms.